Remembering his time at 19 working in a drugstore, Lloyd endured constant scrutiny over the quality of his gathered components. Ruby Duval dismissively rejected his latest delivery, insisting that the freshness of ingredients directly dictated the perfection of her alchemy, and accepting no excuses for anything below standard. After spending an entire grueling week searching day and night to retrieve the legendary fluorine cell, his heart shattered as she casually tossed the rare bloom directly into the garbage. Though the kingdom revered her as a kind-hearted, brilliant genius who invented countless magical tools, the reality behind closed doors was vastly different. To him, she was nothing short of a demon disguised as a scholar, fiercely declaring that every single item within her laboratory had to maintain absolute top quality. Dropping to his knees in utter despair, he realized another grueling search for rare alchemy materials had ended in complete failure. This failure highlighted the rigid division of labor within their profession, where an alchemist devised recipes and performed the mixing, while the assistant mage bore the burden of gathering raw materials. While her success rate for recipe creation and compounding stood at a flawless 100%, his own efficiency in securing materials sat at a dismal 40%. She took delight in highlighting this stark contrast, pointing out that an average assistant maintained a collection rate above 90%, and scolding him for ruining the laboratory's reputation while jeopardizing their deadlines. Bowing his head in shame, he offered a quiet apology, but she pressed forward with an intense glare, demanding to know if he truly understood his duty to supply flawless materials on time. She continued her relentless tirade, calling him slow, useless, and embarrassing, leaving him utterly humiliated as rumors of his incompetence spread throughout the kingdom. His head hung low as the tirade continued, every attempt at an apology only further provoking Ruby's explosive temper as she slammed her hands down in rage. Trapped under the relentless weight of societal criticism and constant workplace harassment, he remembered how even his gentlest requests for restraint were met with harsh contempt and belittlement. The absolute limit of his endurance had finally been reached. He realized he could no longer survive in this miserable environment and resolved to break free immediately. Looking her straight in the eye with trembling intensity, he loudly declared that he was resigning as her assistant mage and leaving the atelier for good. The sudden outburst caught Ruby completely off guard, leaving her staring back at him in stunned silence. Desperate to make his words sink in, he shouted again that their professional bond ended today, but she simply brushed off his declaration, casually telling him to return by evening and prepare curry for dinner. Muttering about how tiresome his dramatic antics were, she told him to go quickly if he was leaving, completely unbothered as he quietly stashed his personal gear into a dimensional spatial vault. Stepping away from the workshop counter with his belongings safely packed, a faint, strained smile broke across his face as he vowed to escape this hellish place as fast as his feet could carry him. However, upon checking the output tray near the exit, he discovered a last-minute request slip from Ruby demanding Earl Grey tea, sparking one final wave of disbelief at her unending arrogance. Finally out on the town square, he sat down heavily on a stone bench, staring blankly ahead as the quiet reality of his sudden freedom slowly settled in. He sat in the public square, watching local children run freely while wondering where his path should lead him next, accepting that it was time to let his long-suppressed emotions out. Glancing up, he spotted a majestic dragon soaring across the open sky, only to look down in dismay at the Earl Grey tea he had instinctively bought for his former master, realizing how deeply ingrained his subservient habits had become. The creature flew without restraint, spreading its great wings and gliding across the heavens in total freedom, completely unbound by the desires or demands of anyone else. Overwhelmed by the sight, tears welled in his eyes as he resolved to start his life over from scratch and live unburdened just like that dragon, paying no mind to the rude remarks of passing townspeople. Boarding a horse-drawn carriage shortly after, he left the capital behind, watching the coastal landscapes and towering spires drift past as the wooden wheels clattered against the rugged road. Sitting inside the swaying vehicle, he clutched his book with renewed hope, comforted by the thought that a brand new town where nobody knew his past awaited him at the end of the line. However, his quiet contemplation was disrupted by his fellow passengers. Mars leaned in close to his elven companion, Lyra, flustering her as he playfully blamed the narrow carriage seating for their physical proximity. Forced to share the tight compartment with the flirtatious pair, the former assistant tried to lose himself in his reading, inwardly cringing as the romantic atmosphere filled the small cabin. Trying to endure their shameless affection, he couldn't help but quietly compare their dynamic to his history with Ruby, recognizing that his bond with her had always been strictly that of a servant obeying a noble master. Memories of their shared past drifted through his mind, recalling how different Ruby had been long ago, harsh, temperamental, and quick to scold him whenever he broke down in tears from hunger during their impoverished youth. He recalled the days of his youth, when a young Ruby shared a piece of bread with him and boldly declared her dream to become the kingdom's greatest alchemist so she would never starve again. She had asked him then to serve as her assistant mage, an offer he timidly accepted with a quiet nod. From that moment on, both threw themselves relentlessly into their work, each completely absorbed in their own duties to the exclusion of all else. Her dedication bore fruit when she was granted noble status as a legendary alchemist, elevating the reputation of their entire workshop. Yet with that success, her personality transformed into one of absolute arrogance. A painful memory cut short as the carriage suddenly shuddered to a violent halt. While his companions teased him for his gloomy muttering inside the cabin, their light-hearted bickering vanished when the panicked shouts of the coachman echoed from outside. Apologizing for his companion's blunt words, Mars led the group out of the carriage to investigate the disturbance, though Lloyd felt little enthusiasm as they stepped onto the road. Before them loomed a horrific, gigantic worm monster erupting straight out of the earth, towering impossibly high over the carriage. Facing the terrifying beast, Mars drew his weapon without hesitation, boldly vowing to risk his life to protect his frightened companion. Touched by his heroic stance, the elf girl beamed with admiration and declared her love, while Lloyd simply observed the dramatic exchange with total deadpan indifference. He reflected on how he and Ruby had never shared such open conversations, motivating him to help the young couple. Generously, he offered to share his past combat experience against the creature to give them actionable advice, an offer Ruby welcomed with immense gratitude. Confidently, he explained that the beast's weak point was its head, assuring them that simply striking it there with a sword would yield an effortless victory. Staring up at the colossal, roaring monstrosity in the distance, the couple remained skeptical, pointing out the glaring flaw in his plan. The creature was far too massive for anyone to reach its head easily. Dismissing his advice as utterly unhelpful, the elven girl muttered to her partner that they couldn't count on the gloomy introvert after all, leaving him internally crestfallen. Deciding to take matters into his own hands, he stepped forward and summoned a sphere of overwhelmingly intense magical energy right before their astonished eyes. Unleashing the catastrophic spell, the burst of raw magic obliterated the colossal monster in a blinding, earth-shattering explosion. As the smoke cleared to reveal total annihilation with no trace of the beast remaining, the elf stammered in shock, pointing out that his attack hadn't just hit the head, but vaporized the creature entirely. Apologizing sheepishly for his advice being useless, he was warmly thanked by Mars anyway, while the elven companion shouted in absolute disbelief at their absurd calm. Her mind completely reeling from the apocalyptic display, the elven warrior shrieked in bewilderment, demanding to know how Mars could possibly remain so unfazed by such terrifying magic. She hysterically denounced his attack spell as an unnatural cheat, while he stood there sweating nervously, lamenting that he was being labeled both a shady freak and a cheat at the same time. She offered a sheepish apology for her earlier panic, explaining that the sheer power of his explosion magic had simply caught her off guard. With a bright smile, she added that, as luck would have it, she too practiced the art of magic. As their travel wagon rolled onward, Mars pointed out that carrying a staff naturally marked her as a mage. When he made a dismissive comment about aging, Lloyd stepped in to challenge his flawed logic, while Ruby chided them both for being so blunt. Driven by sudden inspiration, the young elf cast herself down in a desperate bow, imploring Lloyd to take her as his apprentice. He recoiled in surprise, attempting to downplay his own abilities and insist he was far from a master. He stood frozen as the weight of the word echoed in his mind. having been dismissed as incompetent for so long. Viewed as nothing more than Ruby's unremarkable childhood friend, the sudden title left him utterly bewildered. She pressed on with unbridled passion, clasping her hands and begging him to answer her questions so she could learn to cast such magnificent spells, declaring him a noble soul who never lied. He inwardly winced, feeling entirely unworthy of such lavish praise. Observing the scene, Ruby watched closely as the elf rambled through a confusing mix of formal titles and frantic apologies for her previous rudeness. Offering a gentle, reassuring smile, Lloyd reassured her that everyone makes mistakes in their youth, asking only that she commit to using her magic responsibly. The heartfelt words touched her deeply, bringing tears of gratitude to her eyes. Reinvigorated with joy, she immediately elevated him to mentor status, enthusiastically declaring his greatness and even offering to act as a financial guarantor for his debts. As she eagerly begged to discover the truth of his origins, a moment of doubt crossed Lloyd's mind, making him wonder if his companions would still accept him if his true identity were ever revealed. Seeking to steer the conversation back to familiar ground, he asked if she was familiar with Ruby the Alchemist, to which she enthusiastically confirmed without hesitation. Her eyes gleamed with unbridled admiration as she gushed about Ruby, praising the renowned alchemist for her legendary elixirs and historical inventions. Taking advantage of the moment, the young man quietly asked if she happened to know the name of Ruby's former assistant. The elven companion immediately recalled the scathing rumors surrounding that assistant, a man widely branded as incompetent due to his poor material gathering rate. She confessed how deeply she loathed him, even admitting she used to wish that this worthless assistant named Lloyd would hurry up and perish whenever Ruby's endeavors failed. As her harsh words echoed through the room, the young man slumped forward in complete despair, dark shadows covering his countenance while his companions looked on in confusion. Still completely oblivious to the weight of her previous statement, she tilted her head with a bright smile and casually inquired what had become of that notorious assistant. Tears streaming down his smiling face, the young man finally broke his silence and revealed the painful truth. He was the very Lloyd she had been hoping would die. A horrified silence fell over her as the realization struck, her wide eyes frozen in absolute shock and embarrassment. Overcome with guilt, both she and her allies frantically bowed and apologized, desperately trying to console him as he wept quietly about being hated. Stepping forward with newfound sincerity, she urged him to have confidence in himself, insisting that he was an extraordinary mage who deserved a fresh start here in Minerva. Wiping his tears, he was deeply moved by their warmth and accepted their eager offer of support, thrilled to have found true companions so quickly. Reinvigorated by their friendship, Lloyd resolved to stand strong under his identity as Lloyd Nelver, while his companions enthusiastically plotted ridiculous makeovers to elevate his confidence. 3 weeks after departing the capital, he finally arrived at Minerva, the city of life within the Southlight region. Weary from his grueling past, he was eager to leave behind high-strung personalities and embrace a fun, carefree routine. Standing tall before the bustling, sunlit city, he felt a surge of hope, declaring to himself that his second life was officially beginning right here and right now. Yet that tranquil optimism was short-lived, for as night fell over the sleeping town, a sudden violent impact shattered the silence under the crescent moon. Before he could process the sudden upheaval, a dazzling surge of divine power erupted in the middle of the street, blindingly framing an imposing figure ahead. Confronting him with cold authority, a holy maiden declared that his evil deeds had reached their limit, leaving him in utter panic on his very first night in Minerva as he wondered if his new life was already coming. A few hours earlier, the group had arrived in Minerva, the bustling Southlight regional city. As they walked through the vibrant market square filled with street vendors and lively crowds, the young mage took in the sights of the thriving trade hub. He noted how prosperous the city seemed despite being a long journey from the capital, observing its heavy emphasis on the adventuring trade. His companions agreed, highlighting how adventuring formed the bedrock of the local economy before asking if he had ever considered becoming an adventurer himself. Despite their encouragement, he quickly demurred, admitting he hardly saw himself as the adventurous type, though Tara warmly invited him to join their party regardless. With bright enthusiasm, she launched into a vivid description of an adventurer's calling, roaming distant lands, slaying fearsome monsters, gathering rare materials, and exploring uncharted dungeons. Reflecting on her words, he quietly mused that such work sounded strikingly similar to his former duties as an assistant mage, until Tara suggested they figure out their future plans over lunch. Striking a dramatic pose alongside her assistant, she proudly declared that they would guide him toward a fresh start and help him build a fulfilling second life. As the conversation turned back to lunch, he brought up a communication device used for magic consultations, prompting Lyra to chide him for his extreme frugality and warn that he would never move forward with such a mindset. His frugality became undeniably clear when he revealed his paltry meal consisting of mere crackers and a single piece of fruit, leaving Isolde shouting in shock, while he calmly explained he had already eaten on the journey. He could only watch in mild bewilderment as Isolde enthusiastically showed off her tapioca milk tea, declaring it all the rage in Minerva and rating it a perfect 10 out of 10 before urging them to start their lunch. Handing him a sheet of paper, the elf alchemist instructed him to write down his desired profession, while a small voice chimed in suggesting he become a tour guide instead. The poor young man found his mind going completely blank under the pressure, tears welling up in his eyes as visions of his demanding acquaintances haunted him with endless chores and errands, while Isolde noted that he had seemingly surrendered his dreams and encouraged him to think outside the box. Glancing down at his handwritten wish list, he systematically ruled out options. Being an adventurer or exploring dungeons would lead to being tracked down by Ruby. Going back to school made no sense. Laboratory work lacked the outdoors he craved, and mercenary work was far too bloody, leaving magic-assisted outdoor jobs as his only real desire. Seeing his predicament, Isolde proposed that opening a tool shop might suit his extensive knowledge of material harvesting, an idea that momentarily sparked his interest until his companions criticized his overly negative justifications for avoiding adventuring. However, the mere thought of running a shop triggered a sudden wave of panic, as he instantly envisioned his former master, Ruby, storming into the store to purchase alchemy ingredients. In his terrifying nightmare sequence, she aggressively grabbed him by the collar, roaring demands for him to gather rare materials immediately and hand them over completely free of charge. Snapping back to reality, he listened as they suggested carpentry as another alternative, prompting him to picture a peaceful life crafting sturdy roofs for satisfied, smiling homeowners. Yet that peaceful fantasy was instantly shattered as Ruby reappeared in his mind to harshly criticize his craftsmanship, smashing the structure and leaving him cowering on the ground in tears of apology. As he reeled from these imaginary disasters, Tara suddenly grabbed his hands with gleaming, eager eyes, enthusiastically proposing that they team up and become adventurers together. He sat quietly as his companions chimed in with supportive words, urging him not to let fear of his former master hold him back from pursuing the life he truly desired. The alchemist pointed out that the chances of his former mentor ever finding out were absurdly low, emphasizing that the choice to return or forge a new path belonged entirely to him. Overwhelmed by their generosity, the young mage offered a soft word of thanks, to which they responded with beaming confidence, promising to lend him their full support if he chose the life of an adventurer. Reflecting on his past, he realized he could no longer live in constant dread, prompting him to ask if someone like him could truly join their ranks, a question answered with resounding, joyful approval that finally banished his fear. Striking a bold, dramatic pose, he declared the rebirth of his spirit, announcing with unbridled passion that he was officially stepping forward as a new man and a novice adventurer. Stepping out into the bustling city streets, the newly resolved youth stretched his arms toward the sky with immense relief, relishing the sweet freedom of walking without fear, while his companions looked on with mixed feelings. Their stroll brought them before a towering bronze monument, which the alchemist identified as a statue of the Saint of the Emerald Church, a figure renowned for receiving divine revelations. After noting the strict religious laws regarding the saint's dignity, the young swordsman bade the group farewell for the evening, agreeing to meet them bright and early at the guild hall the following day. Left behind in the alleyway, the young mage struck another dazzling pose, announcing to the open air that he was off to train his skills and satisfy his appetite before his grand debut. As he dramatically rushed off, his cheerful companion smiled at his renewed vigor, whereas the sharp-eared alchemist could only gaze in bewildered disbelief at his sudden, over-the-top personality shift. Cornered in a narrow street by aggressive ruffians demanding his money, Lloyd found himself in an unexpected predicament. As he nervously muttered about his adventuring career coming to a premature end, the thugs grew increasingly agitated by his hesitant response. Before the confrontation could escalate, a colossal pillar of ice suddenly shattered the pavement, freezing the attackers in their tracks. He immediately recognized the spell as Ice Spear, an exceptionally high-level magic, as a firm voice proclaimed that the villain's misdeeds ended there. Stepping fearlessly in front of him was a young woman dressed in elaborate priestess attire, commanding the ruffians to stand down. Undeterred by her sudden intervention, the enraged criminals shouted threats back at her. Watching her prepare another spell, the young mage realized with sudden horror that casting such potent ice magic again within the town limits would cause catastrophic collateral damage. She, however, seemed determined to proceed, declaring that she had no other choice. Driven by urgency, he activated a physical enhancement spell and darted forward like lightning, sweeping the young priestess off her feet just as her power flared. His swift intervention successfully interrupted the cast, saving the surrounding neighborhood from being encased in solid ice. Having safely neutralized the situation and knocked out the aggressors, he gently explained that Ice Spear was an overly complex spell for close quarters, advising her that beginner magic would be far safer in urban settings. Contrite, she lowered her head and offered a soft apology. Expressing sincere gratitude, she thanked him for preventing a disaster, to which he modestly demurred while welcoming her thanks. Deep down, however, he marveled at her priestess garments and immense magic power, wondering who she could possibly be. Spotting a small trickle of blood on his cheek, the attentive priestess gasped and told him to remain motionless. He brushed it off as a mere scratch, but she insisted on attending to the wound immediately. As she leaned in exceptionally close to cast her healing spell, boasting of her proficiency in restorative arts, his heart began to pound frantically. Overwhelmed by her extreme proximity, he realized he had never been this close to a girl before, not even his formidable former master, causing his face to flush deeply. Breaking the tense silence, she introduced herself as Iris, prompting him to stutteringly offer his own name in return. In the conversation that followed, they discovered to their mutual delight that both of them had just arrived in town that very day. Her dazzling smile caught him completely off guard as she eagerly inquired about his occupation, leaving him stammering that he was merely a novice adventurer. She naively assumed that a mage of his caliber must be an extraordinary hero, before casually revealing with a bright grin that she herself was currently unemployed. When he modestly downplayed his status and turned the question back to her, her carefree attitude remained unchanged. Finding comfort in the fact that they shared a similar situation, he could not help but feel a sudden sense of kinship with her as they walked side by side down the street. As they passed the thugs left unconscious on the pavement, he asked what brought her to the city of Minerva, only for her to reveal her simple goal of trying tapioca milk tea, delighted when he offered to guide her to a local shop. Their time together passed quickly until dusk fell over the plaza, where the distant town clock began to chime, prompting her to mention that it was getting late and her attendant was waiting at the inn. Clinging dramatically to the moment, he jokingly pleaded with Princess Iris not to abandon him in the dark night, though inwardly he wondered about her old-fashioned air and who this mysterious attendant might be. A sudden wave of panic washed over him as he recalled harsh reprimands from his past, forcing him to bow frantically and blurt out apologies for his overly familiar behavior. Yet she responded with purest elegance, smiling radiantly like a saint and addressing him playfully as Prince Lloyd, which completely overwhelmed him with gratitude. Seizing on his emotional display, she asked if he would grant her a favor, to which he eagerly agreed to do anything, only to be utterly dumbfounded when she sheepishly requested his help in finding her way home. Unbeknownst to the pair, Isolde and Tara were spying on them from around the corner, with Isolde admitting she had quietly followed out of concern for Lloyd, while Tara watched on with a mischievous grin. She found herself completely lost in a wild romantic fantasy, imagining a tragic love triangle straight out of a melodramatic novel, involving an exiled prince, a holy maiden, and a genius alchemist. As she gleefully spun her dramatic scenario, her companion stepped in to snap her out of her delusion, offering to take the lead instead. Enraged at having her cherished romantic shipping ruined, she readied a sharp projectile, threatening to put an arrow straight through his head if he dared interfere any further. Moments later, as they walked near the bustling Adventurers Guild, her anger vanished into pure delight at the sight, until a sudden, echoing commotion shattered the peace. Even amid the sudden chaos, her romantic fixation remained unshakable as she quoted lines from her favorite stories, silently wishing her companion good luck in his own burgeoning romance. Meanwhile, Lloyd gently reassured Iris, suggesting they step inside the imposing Adventurers Guild to ask for directions to her destination. But upon stepping through the doors, they were greeted not by friendly staff, but by a hall full of terrifying, hardened warriors oozing an intense, suffocating aura. Standing amidst the intimidating crowd was a massive, scarred fighter clutching a defiled portrait of the beloved saint, enraged that someone had pierced her likeness with an arrow. Spotting the newcomers, the giant instantly recognized the notorious young man, accusing him of holding back the kingdom's top talents and calling out his infamous title as the incompetent mage. Hearing his title, panic washed over Lloyd as he realized his shameful reputation was now exposed, while Iris quietly wondered if her own identity had been uncovered as well. He strained to think of a way to defuse the hostility without causing harm, but the angry mob rushed in, forcing his hand. With a quick gesture of his staff, he cast a vine spell that sprouted rapidly, binding the aggressive adventurers in tight, unbreakable tendrils. As the vine squirmed and constricted, the bound men cried out in uncomfortable embarrassment, leaving the young mage deeply mortified by the horrifying sight he had unintentionally created. The bizarre commotion quickly summoned Isolde, the guild chief, who arrived covering her ears in sheer annoyance while he frantically attempted to explain the misunderstanding. Looming over the grand staircase, Isolde cast an imposing shadow, her stern gaze instantly cutting through the chaos of the room. Seeking to clarify the situation to Isolde, he admitted that the formidable alchemist had once served as his personal bodyguard, thoroughly surprising Iris. Upon closer inspection, Isolde gasped in sudden realization, instantly recognizing Iris as the exalted saint of Holy Roland. A group of disgraced adventurers fell to their knees in full prostration, their heads pressed against the floor as they loudly begged for forgiveness. They desperately explained that they had been unaware of her true identity as the great saint of the Holy Roland Kingdom, deeply regretting their earlier insolence. She stood before them with calm grace, gently asking them to lift their heads and noting that she usually kept her face hidden behind a mask to avoid such commotion. Observing the groveling men, he scratched his head in utter bewilderment, questioning why everyone was showing such extreme deference. He mused aloud whether this humbled posture was standard guild policy, wonderingly asking what made a saint from a neighboring realm so exceptionally special in the first place. In response to his casual ignorance, his companion grabbed him violently by the collar, shouting in panic at his complete lack of awareness. The seasoned warrior frantically warned him to watch his tongue, explaining that the maiden possessed the legendary divine power known as Holy Law, making her an irreplaceable figure of supreme importance. He went on to elaborate on the nature of this sacred gift, describing how divine magic could breathe life into barren earth and turn desolate regions into fertile paradises. Conversely, he noted that lands left untouched by this holy grace devolved into perilous wastes swarming with high-ranking demonic beasts. Continuing his explanation, he emphasized that because only a single saint was ever born in any given country, each realm guarded theirs with extreme reverence from birth. As the history lesson concluded, the young listener secretly contemplated whether he should finally remove the magical vine still binding his ally's mouth. As these grand revelations set in, a sudden contradiction struck him, bringing back a lingering memory from their very first conversation. He recalled her peaceful expression when she had plainly described herself as merely an unemployed traveler. Before he could question the discrepancy, a thunderous roar erupted across the hall as the guild chief stepped forward in absolute fury. She furiously bellowed at the troublemakers who had dared raise their fists against a holy maiden, instantly declaring that every single one of them was demoted to the lowest rank. With brutal efficiency, she carried out her punishment, slamming heavy demotion seals directly onto the faces and forearms of the wailing men. They shrieked in terror and agony, weeping as the harsh mark of disgraced adventurers burned into their flesh. Unable to bear their distress, she immediately stepped in with a distressed plea, begging the furious leader to spare them from further harm. She urgently revealed that she was no longer a functioning saint, desperately trying to protect the unfortunate men from receiving any more punishment. Her unexpected announcement left the room in utter disarray, causing Isolde to shriek in sheer disbelief. Lloyd tried to process her words, wondering what it could possibly mean for her to no longer be a saint. Sensing their confusion, she quietly explained that a new saintess had already been appointed to take her place. Isolde felt a cold sweat break out, nervously questioning whether revealing such a truth to these zealous believers was wise, terrified of how they might react to someone who no longer held sacred protection. An intense vibration of energy rippled through the hallway as the imposing adventurers began to shudder, staring fixedly in her direction. Instead of turning violent, the burly men burst into dramatic tears of devotion, weeping that such selfless sacrifice was the true mark of a saint. Lloyd watched in total bewilderment as they sobbed hysterically in gratitude. Clearing her throat softly, she requested that Isolde spare the group from harsh punishment, offering her forgiveness as long as honesty was maintained. Overwhelmed by her grace, the guild chief quickly agreed. The crowd erupted into thunderous cheers for the divine order, while she meekly confirmed her title once more. Lloyd could only gaze at the scene, amazed by the sheer fanatical nature of the room. As night melted into dawn across the quiet town, peace returned to the sleeping streets outside the guild structure. Walking down the sunlit cobblestone path the following morning, Lloyd marveled at how swiftly the crisis had passed, relieved that Iris had been present to prevent disaster. Accompanying them along the road, their companion apologized for getting lost earlier, affirming her belief in Lloyd's good heart and expressing how much she had enjoyed their time together. Iris asked Lloyd not to apologize, sharing that wandering the quiet town streets at night had given her a rare taste of life as an ordinary girl rather than a revered figure. Having spent her entire life bound to the duty of a saint, she explained how she empathized with his sense of isolation, acknowledging that everyone carries their own hidden burdens and struggles to find a place where they belong. Caught off guard by her deep understanding, he stammered in mild confusion while trying to express his sincere gratitude, reassuring her that no thanks were necessary on her part. Leaning in with a playful smirk, she teased him about his formal demeanor, confessing with a soft whisper that calling him a prince made her heart flutter with high expectations. Flustered by her proximity, a sudden idea struck him, and he eagerly pointed toward the looming clock tower, proposing they visit the high structure together, a suggestion she warmly accepted. Activating a physical enhancement magic, he unexpectedly swept her into his arms and bounded straight up the outer wall, sending her into a momentary panic as they soared upward. Vaulting high above the cobblestone streets, he leaped effortlessly across the slate rooftops beneath the darkening sky, carrying Iris swiftly toward their destination. Setting her down gently on the high balcony, he urged her to watch her step, while she gasped in awe at the breathtaking panoramic view of the glowing town below. Standing beside an ornate street lamp atop the tower, he shared the lore of the city's magical illumination, explaining how a legendary smith named Hecate crafted the light stones to absorb sunlight by day and brighten the nights. Recalling his lonely journeys through the dark wilderness in search of rare materials, he reflected on how gazing down at the distant, shining town from the mountains had always brought peace to his weary heart. He softly instructed her not to turn away just as she began to thank him, directing her attention toward the horizon where the sun was beginning to break through. As the first rays of morning sun burst over the mountain crest, the magic stone atop the tower absorbed the light, illuminating the entire sleeping city below in a brilliant radiance. Gazing out over the brightened landscape, he quietly confessed his humble origins, explaining that he was merely a former assistant mage who had grown disillusioned with his life and fled to Minerva, considering himself to be no one special. She listened intently before softly offering her own perspective, remarking on the beauty of the view and expressing her joy at being able to share her favorite scenery with someone she considered a truly special friend. Warm emotion filled her eyes as she looked toward the vast horizon, voicing her heartfelt wish to build a meaningful life and discover her own true place within such a beautiful world. Moved by her words, he reached out and gently clasped her hand with a reassuring smile. But the sudden physical touch startled her so intensely that her face flushed completely red. Overwhelmed by panic and embarrassment, she let out an unexpected scream, her physical reflexes kicking in with shocking strength. In a flurry of panicked strength, she executed a flawless throw, tossing him clean over her shoulder and slamming him onto the stone floor of the observation deck. Seeing him lying groaning on the floor, she immediately hovered over him in remorse, while he painfully admitted that he had only meant to live up to her high expectations. Listening to his sheepish justification, her tension completely dissolved into a burst of genuine, cheerful laughter, leaving him wide-eyed as he watched her smile radiate in the morning sun. Her light-hearted chuckles echoed across the clock tower as she teased him, admitting that he had already far exceeded her expectations. Flustered on all fours, he could only wonder what kind of life she truly envisioned for herself in this new place. Gazing out over the sunlit rooftops of the capital, she quietly expressed her simple desire to spend peaceful, relaxing days alongside her new friend. While he pondered her words, an observer watched on, contemplating the unfolding situation. Meanwhile, back at the guild, Isolde celebrated enthusiastically with her companion, declaring a complete victory for their strategy, entirely unaware of a sinister presence looming behind her. Caught completely off guard, her triumphant mood instantly vaporized as a towering, imposing figure demanded to hear every detail of the story, leaving her paralyzed with sheer terror. Meanwhile, across the city, the sun shone brightly over the ornate towers of Ruby's atelier in the royal capital. Outside the workshop, the head alchemist was struck with utter disbelief when an official inspector arrived to deliver troubling news regarding an overdue request that had dragged on for over a week. The auditor sternly announced that due to the ongoing state of emergency and the absence of her assistant, the atelier's official rating was being demoted to B rank, sending her into a panic about her establishment's falling reputation. Desperate to preserve her guild's trustworthiness, she pleaded and shouted after the official as he calmly turned and walked away. Overwhelmed by mounting frustration, her rage erupted against Lloyd, furious that he had disappeared for 3 whole weeks without a word. Staring out toward the city horizon, her irritation lingered as she wondered what had become of the other atelier members as well. She fumed with rage as she remembered the complaints from frustrated clients, who claimed they were turned away when asking for help gathering rare materials. Refusing to accept that the tasks were too difficult, she threw a childish tantrum, convincing herself that envious rivals were sabotaging her atelier out of petty jealousy before ultimately blaming Lloyd for all her troubles. Her eyes narrowed with fierce resolve as she swore to reach the rank of a Chronicle-class alchemist all on her own, just like the legendary Hecate. Deciding that she no longer needed her unreliable partner, she resolved then and there to seek out a brand new assistant mage to replace him. Standing outside the Adventurer Guild, Lloyd felt a wave of unease wash over him as he waited for his companions, who were unusually late. His anxiety turned to shock moments later when an imposing warrior woman strode into view, casually dragging a defeated Lyra and Mars across the stone floor behind her. As the formidable woman casually admitted to having subjected the duo to a brief interrogation following a morning disturbance, Isolde looked on in utter horror at the thoroughly broken and trembling state of her allies after a mere half-day in custody. Turning her piercing gaze directly onto him, the intimidating interrogator revealed that word of his reputation had preceded him, demanding to know the true purpose of his arrival in town. Disconcerted by her intense scrutiny, he frantically turned to Isolde for an explanation, questioning what kind of harsh interrogation method had been inflicted upon his friends. Flashbacks revealed the somber depths of the grim guild's interrogation room shortly before, where the armored figure had bound Mars to a chair while Lyra was held captive alongside him under heavy guard. Isolde had rushed forward in disbelief, trying to extract answers from the speechless and thoroughly traumatized pair, only to realize that Lyra was utterly unable to utter a single sound. Unfazed, the imposing warrior explained that she had placed a silencing spell on the half-elf to prevent any spell casting, choosing to neutralize any magical threat before commencing her questioning. Pressing her aggressive line of inquiry, she leaned over the helpless boy, demanding to know if their assault on the guild was an act of religious terrorism or the work of foreign spies. Watching the tense confrontation unfold, Isolde panicked silently, dreading the embarrassment that would occur if Mars revealed her absurd secret motive to everyone present. She desperately tried to signal a cover story, mouthing for them to claim a bandit attack with a stray arrow was responsible for the chaos. Seeing the young adventurer nod, she briefly hoped her message had gotten through. However, her subtle signals were completely misunderstood, as the young man boldly announced to the interrogator that his companion simply wanted to play matchmaker. Horrified by his sudden confession, the elf could only stare in wide-eyed panic as her desperate scheme collapsed instantly. Oblivious to her anguish, the youth pressed on, explaining how his friend was obsessed with a popular romantic novel and believed all conflict could be resolved through love, leaving the imposing warrior woman completely bewildered. Inside her mind, the guild chief screamed in sheer mortification, horrified that her embarrassing literary tastes were about to be laid bare before the entire room. Before he could utter another word about the novel's plot, she frantically burst forward and cut him off, taking full blame just to silence him, much to the interrogator's disbelief at the bizarre spectacle. Exhausted by the absurd turn of events, the formidable guild master decided to let the matter slide, ordering the pair to perform unpaid guild requests 3 days a week for a month as penalty. Shifting her focus, the commander turned her attention to the mysterious assistant mage from the capital, troubled by how someone reputed to be incompetent possessed enough power to neutralize her guild's top adventurers. Her suspicions deepened as she connected the dots between his presence in both recent incidents, the suspicious assault on the guild, and the sudden, unannounced arrival of the holy saint the previous night. With a cold, resolute glare, the guild master swore that if the young mage posed any threat to the city of Minerva, she would banish him immediately in the name of the guild. She pondered quietly to herself how to force the young man to reveal his true capabilities, while his companions cheerfully inquired whether he had officially registered as an adventurer yet. Caught off guard by her sudden, intense glare as she demanded to know what he had just said, he stumbled over his words in flustered confusion. Before he could gather his thoughts, she loudly declared that the guild's official examination was underway, rallying the eager group onto a horse-drawn cart as they set off toward their destination. As they traveled, she explained that they were heading to a special location containing the trial crystal, an ancient artifact capable of measuring the raw strength of anyone who touched it. Hearing that the magical orb possessed dozens of auxiliary functions, including personality analysis and fortune-telling, he couldn't help but feel bewildered by its absurdly broad range of uses. However, one specific feature caught his attention: the ability to determine a person's true vocational aptitude and reveal the career path to which they were genuinely suited. Overjoyed at the prospect, he realized this test might finally grant him permission to quit forced adventuring and pursue a completely different life, as the others enthusiastically sent him off. Unbeknownst to him, the guild master silently watched his excitement, confident that the sacred crystal would inevitably strip away his facade and expose his hidden power. Shortly after, the party arrived at the Temple of the Winds, a towering dungeon located an hour from Minerva where they had to fight through hordes of monsters to reach the crystal at the top. Ascending the stone staircases inside the grand structure, he struck up a casual conversation with Isolde, asking if she had already discovered her own true vocation when she previously took the test. He suddenly froze, sensing a surge of dangerous monster presences lurking on the stone floor below them. When he voiced his concern, the guild master coldly brushed him off, stating it was none of his business, though the threat below was rapidly drawing nearer. Looking down into the vast chamber below, they witnessed monstrous black spiders and giant armored beetles ambushing a group of helpless adventurers, prompting the guild master to leap into action and obliterate the beasts. Stepping forward beside her companions, Isolde proudly announced to the trembling survivors that they were now safe under the protection of Class B adventurers, urging them to make their escape while the path remained clear. As the rescued adventurers scrambled up the stone steps, the guild master turned her attention back to the young mage, sternly questioning whether he truly understood the core purpose and responsibility of the Adventurers Guild. Enveloping her blade in swirling gale force magic, she surged into the monster horde to eliminate every remaining threat, leaving him thoroughly impressed by her prowess as a magic swordsman. When another creature ambushed them from behind, he effortlessly enhanced his physical abilities to slice through a giant spider before destroying a second beast with a blinding lightning spell, stunning Isolde mid-warning. Astonished by his fluid and waste-free movements, Isolde watched him quickly harvest materials from the fallen creatures, completely casting doubt on the rumors of his incompetency. Testing his mindset, the guild master asked how he would handle an overwhelming monster, only for him to casually state that he would unleash 16 consecutive explosion spells merely to cover a tactical retreat. She stood in quiet disbelief, calculating the utter absurdity of using high-tier mass destruction spells as a mere distraction and realizing how terrifyingly skewed his perception of normal spellcasting was. Pausing their descent for a brief rest in the colossal dungeon chamber, Isolde served tea to the party, inwardly lamenting how reusing tea bags made her feel like a commoner despite her noble elf heritage. She looked on in startled silence as Mars presented a plate of freshly cooked food to Lloyd, who asked if she had prepared the meal herself. Before she could stop them, the hungry adventurers happily dove in, ignoring her flustered protest that they should not be eating the dish she made. The food proved to be an absolute delight, bringing instant smiles to everyone around the table. Savoring every bite, the young mage admitted it was a welcome relief after days of surviving on tough dried meat in the dungeon, while his companion marveled at how someone skilled in both blade and magic could also be such an exceptional cook. Straightening up with noble pride, she explained that as the sole daughter of the Lord of Minerva, mastering various crafts was simply part of upholding her family's prestige without needing special praise. Suddenly turning on her heel, she abruptly announced their departure, leaving him to awkwardly inquire whether her rigorous training had reflected her crystal vocation as she marched ahead. As they made their way deeper into the corridor, his companion quietly called out to him from behind. Whispering as they climbed the massive stone staircase along the fortress walls, she shared her suspicion that their leader was concealing her true crystal results and asked if he was curious as well. He thoughtfully acknowledged that everyone has secrets they prefer to keep hidden, though he admitted his own curiosity about how the assessment worked before turning the conversation to ask her for a favor. At last, the group stepped into a grand ceremonial hall where the glowing trial crystal sat poised atop its ancient stone altar. She begins demonstrating the artifact's function, instructing the group to hold it in their hands and simply ask what they wish to learn. As she holds the orb, it promptly speaks aloud her impressive credentials, identifying her as an S-rank adventurer proficient in advanced magic and swordsmanship. Intrigued by the crystal's responsiveness, the young mage enthusiastically inquires about her primary vocations, causing her to instantly panic as the artifact begins to answer. Realizing the crystal possesses a detailed ranking system, she lunges forward in a desperate attempt to silence the glowing orb before it can broadcast any more of her personal details, but it relentlessly announces her third highest vocation as a martial artist. Her panic intensifies as the stone proceeds to reveal her second-place vocation of Holy Knight, leading her to frantically command the artifact to cancel the evaluation before her absolute top vocation is exposed to the entire group. Despite her desperate cries, the crystal impassively declares her true top vocation to be a baker. An awkward silence falls across the chamber, leaving the rest of the party struck speechless by the unexpected revelation. Her face flushes bright red with humiliation under the silent, wide-eyed stares of her companions, who struggle to process the stark contrast between an S-rank warrior and a master pastry chef. Within the cavernous stone sanctuary, the heavy silence lingers as everyone absorbs the hilarious truth behind her formidable reputation. Breaking the quiet, she sheepishly clutches the orb tight and stammers out a quiet confession that she simply enjoys sweet confections, while the young mage stumbles over his words trying to gently reassure her. Suddenly, the ground trembles violently as one of the massive stone eagle statues bursts into life, transforming into a ferocious, feather-and-talon beast that leaps down from its perch to attack the party. Recognizing the legendary predator immediately, the group dodges frantically while the giant monster screeches, shattering the peace of the chamber in an instant life-or-death battle. His eyes widened in absolute horror as the colossal stone griffin above them stirred to life, swallowing hard before unleashing an overwhelming, intimidating aura. He could only scream out in sheer panic, terrified for the fate of his newly revealed vocation as a shadow of uncertainty began to engulf the chamber. A formidable griffin swept through the stone corridors, clutching the stolen trial crystal tightly in its talons, while the companions gave desperate chase from below. Determined to recover the artifact, he channeled a surge of electric power into his staff, demanding that the beast return the stolen crystal. The agile creature veered swiftly through the air, dodging the lethal lightning bolts as they exploded harmlessly against the ancient masonry. As Isolde watched in disbelief at the monster's evasive speed, he intensified his magical output, unleashing a massive thunderbolt spell that shattered the surrounding stonework. The elf-eared guild chief immediately scolded him for recklessly damaging the tower, though he stammered an apology while questioning why such a high-level monster was roaming the premises. Deciding that explanations could wait, she rallied the team to subdue the beast immediately before it could inflict further damage or harm anyone else. The companions pursued the creature deeper into the maze-like corridors of the temple, only for the griffin to vanish down one of the branching pathways, leaving Mars utterly frustrated. Striking upon a bizarre idea to trick the crystal's hidden magical response, he suddenly yelled out a random question about Isolde's favorite food, catching everyone completely off guard. He shouted the answer into the cavernous hall, causing the magical crystal hidden down a distant passageway to glow bright with energy and expose the monster's location. He continued sprinting alongside the group, listening as the others pondered whether the trial crystal would still provide answers once physical contact had ceased. Seeking a quick solution, the young mage openly asked the artifact to reveal Isolde's specific abilities. Because the crystal had already answered that particular inquiry earlier, it remained silent, prompting confusion among the runners as to why such valuable information couldn't be repeated. Overhearing their trivial debate, the guild chief spun around in a flustered rage, shouting at them to ignore her secrets, focus on saving human lives, and ask whatever questions were necessary without holding back. Taken aback by her intense outburst, the young mage found himself paralyzed with embarrassment, realizing he had no idea what proper questions to ask on his own. Deciding to press forward anyway, the group began bombarding the glowing crystal with personal queries about their companion. Learning that her specialty was wind magic and her favorite animal was a rabbit, much to her agonizing humiliation. As the flustered warrior pleaded with them to stop staring, the crystal nonchalantly exposed more of her private tastes, declaring to everyone present that her favorite reading material was romance novels. The barrage of embarrassing queries quickly escalated into absurd specifics, with the crystal revealing her preference for boundary-transcending love stories while she shrieked in desperation for them to cease their interrogation. Realizing that their playful interrogation had done nothing to narrow the gap with the fleeing creature, the young mage invoked a speed enhancement spell to propel the entire party forward at tremendous velocity. The overwhelmed party rocketed down the corridor at uncontrollable speeds due to the spell's absurd potency, causing several members to lose their footing and crash violently along the stone walls. Following the catastrophic crash, the battered party lay strewn across the stone hallway, completely spent and thoroughly defeated by their own runaway momentum. As he pushed further ahead, the nearby novices encouraged one another while discussing his imminent joining of their guild, noting that his test examiner was none other than the feared guild master herself. Overhearing the chatter, Isolde reflected bitterly on the guild master's terrifying reputation, knowing that her brutal training regime left everyone too frightened to team up with her. Suddenly, a ferocious griffin let out a piercing screech as it descended upon the corridor, but Lloyd ignored the danger and lunged straight toward the trial crystal. Taking charge of the chaotic situation, the guild master ordered the senior adventurers to evacuate the novices immediately, ignoring their bewildered questions about Lloyd's bizarre behavior. Without missing a beat, Lloyd confronted the monster directly, launching a punishing stream of water bullet magic that pinned the furious creature down before it could escape. Watching him fight, Isolde grew increasingly suspicious of his intense determination to extract the trial crystal at all costs. The surrounding spectators murmured in awe as they realized the vast difference between his reputation as an incompetent mage and his true, master-level magical prowess. A sudden, chilling realization washed over Isolde as she pieced together his persistent inquiries about the crystals since arriving with Saint Iris. In her mind, she pictured a sinister mastermind who had manipulated the vulnerable princess all along just to claim the legendary artifact's power for himself. Before she could blurt out her dark accusation regarding Mars's fate, a sudden silence spellbound her speech, choking back her words instantly. Her attempts to speak were cut short, leaving her to watch in silence as Iris seized the initiative. Recalling Lloyd's instructions on concealing sounds, Iris launched a direct magical strike at the griffin, daring the beast to take her attack head-on. The force of the blow struck the creature, causing it to cough out the orb hidden within its throat. Seeing the coveted vocation crystal tumble into the air, Lloyd shouted in pure triumph. Reacting instantly, the party members dove forward together to catch the falling relic. As it slipped through the air, someone managed to grab it mid-descent with a sharp burst of tension. Clasping the crystal tight in his hands, Lloyd eagerly pleaded for it to disclose his true calling. The surface began to radiate an intense glow, gathering energy to reveal his destiny. As the blinding light subsided, magical lettering appeared inside the sphere, declaring his sole vocation was to be Ruby's servant. The absurd verdict left him standing entirely stunned. Memories rushed back of the countless nights he had spent studying alchemy in secret, poring over heavy books until sunrise just to prove his worth as her assistant. Though Ruby had frequently scolded him for overstepping his place and failing to follow exact instructions, she had nevertheless always viewed him as her proper assistant mage. Overcome by the harsh realization of his fixed fate, Lloyd collapsed into hysterical tears, weeping over his inability to change his life. Isolde could only gaze at his breakdown in total astonishment. Interrupting his despair, the griffin suddenly recovered and swooped down from above to strike at him. Catching sight of the impending danger, Isolde shouted a warning for him to look out. Stepping forward without hesitation, she raised her heavy hammer to block the monster's sharp claws right above Lloyd, reminding him fiercely that no crystal had the power to decide his future. Only he did. She shouted above the chaos, declaring that while baking cakes might have brought smiles to more faces, she remained fiercely proud of her chosen path as an adventurer. Inspired by her fierce resolve, the young mage looked up at her with newfound clarity and awe, uttering her name as the fog of his self-doubt finally lifted. Seizing the momentum, she resolved to shove the giant creature out of the tower wall, commanding him to unleash his strongest spell the moment it was airborne, to which he eagerly agreed. Combining wind and thunderstorm magic into a devastating joint attack, a colossal magic crest flared in the sky, blasting the monster away into the stormy horizon. As the echoes of the magical blast faded, the heavy storm clouds parted, allowing radiant beams of sunlight to pierce through and illuminate the quieted land below. Back inside the ancient structure, a gloved hand carefully placed the glowing vocation crystal back onto its rightful pedestal. With the artifact safely secured, the guild commander remarked that order had been restored, though she chided the elf for suspecting a grand scheme was afoot, prompting an apologetic yet bewildered reaction. Reassuring the young wizard, the commander offered her warm encouragement, noting that this town was a place where anyone could forge a new path, to which he offered his heartfelt gratitude. Curious to test the artifact's true nature, Isolde asked the crystal to reveal Lloyd's favorite food, and it promptly responded with pot au feu, surprising them both with its mundane omniscience. Turning to him with a gentle smile, she offered to treat him to a celebratory meal for passing his adventurer test, a proposal he accepted with unbridled joy. He stood among his companions outside the sprawling guild tower, surrounded by cheers as they received official confirmation that they had passed the adventurer trial. The guild leader warmly acknowledged their achievement, announcing that they were now officially permitted to take on weekly guild requests. Following the glorious news, his allies immediately began planning their next steps, eagerly volunteering to join him on upcoming quests and promising swift healing whenever necessary. Observing their eagerness, the guild commander struck a proud pose while dropping subtle hints, casually mentioning that Sundays were her day off and when she usually sought out adventures. Rather than extending an invitation, the group lightheartedly bombarded her with personal favors, asking for baked cakes and book recommendations, leaving the young mage chuckling in mild disbelief. As the conversation drifted toward cultural customs and local teachings, he quietly gazed toward the town skyline, firmly deciding to establish his new home in this bustling city. A few days later, a cheerful song drifted through the corridors of a cozy inn in Minerva, where a lavish morning meal was being meticulously prepared. Bursting into the dining quarters with grand fanfare, Mars proudly showcased an exquisite spread of consommé soup, artisan bread, and a fresh tomato omelet meant specifically for Princess Iris. To his utter surprise, the seat at the table was empty, and the maid composedly informed him that the princess had already departed at dawn to practice her magic. Crushed that his morning tradition had been interrupted, the companion sank to his knees in despair, while the staff remarked on how remarkably active the princess had become since moving to Minerva. Leaning in close as the maid quietly ate her meal, he couldn't help but ponder aloud whether this sudden surge of motivation in the princess was entirely due to the influence of Lloyd. As he pondered Iris's sudden change, elsewhere a quiet report was being delivered to a nobleman. The maid recounted how Princess Iris had snuck out in the middle of the night during their first evening in Minerva to secretly meet a young man named Lloyd, noting that the two had grown remarkably close. Hearing this unexpected revelation, the nobleman lowered his head as shadow shrouded his face, his voice trembling with suppressed anger as he questioned why this had happened, realizing that the princess was genuinely looking forward to their next meeting. Enraged by the news, he burst into a fiery outburst, demanding to know why no one had informed him of this until now. The maid calmly replied that he had never asked, silently recalling Lloyd's plain features while her master began suspecting the young man of being an opportunistic scammer. Resolving to take action, his scowl twisted into a sinister smile as he declared that he would personally accompany her as an escort on the next assignment, his dark intent casting a figurative shadow over a helpless Lloyd. Plunging his knife into the meat on his plate with chilling enthusiasm, he voiced his twisted anticipation for their upcoming encounter, leaving the maid trembling in fear as preparations began to assign 2 escorts for the saint. 1 week earlier at the Adventurers Guild Hall, the counter clerk was dumbfounded by how quickly the team had returned from their assignment, noting that a task usually requiring 3 days to collect 40 goblins and 20 red boars had been accomplished in a fraction of that time. Boldly boasting of their status as elite adventurers, the team attempted to gloss over the truth that they had barely moved during the entire ordeal while greeting those around them. Suddenly, the guild commander barged into the room carrying a massive, multi-tiered cake, explaining that after her subordinates discovered her passion for baking, she decided to prepare enough dessert to feed everyone. Turning her firm gaze toward the young mage, she advised him that he truly needed to complete at least one commission entirely on his own without relying on others. She pointed out that he was still acting as a caretaker for his companions, prompting him to ask if she had any desires of her own beyond preparing sweet treats for the guild. He beamed with satisfaction, declaring that living a quiet, relaxed life was his ultimate dream, a vision of domestic pampering that left the commander visibly exasperated. As his companions eagerly requested that he prepare curry for dinner, the commander scolded them for being overly dependent on him. Taking her advice to heart, he set off early the next morning into the great forest of Vid, accepting several solo gathering missions to carve out some personal independence. Having already completed a subjugation quest slated for 5 days before lunch, he carefully placed a harvested goblin ear into his storage box, determined to wrap up 3 more tasks before the day ended. He pondered his progress while holding a piece of monster meat, calculating that by relying on recovery magic to skip sleep, he could accomplish 5 times as many tasks in a single night. His tiny demon companion pointed out that constantly healing himself just to avoid resting was completely absurd. The sudden realization hit him, prompting the small devil to scream that working non-stop was the exact opposite of a peaceful, slow life. Clutching his head in embarrassment, He fell to his knees as he recognized how far off track his mindset had drifted. Taking advantage of his despair, the imp mocked him for having no actual desires or plans for his ideal lifestyle, questioning what he even intended to do with his free time. He could only stare blankly, unable to offer a single argument against her taunts. Before he could recover, she forcefully shoved a piece of food into his mouth, commanding him to eat, get back to work, and eventually return to her service. The sudden assault left him choking on the bread in shock. Swallowing the bite, he defiantly rejected her bossy demands, declaring that he refused to just follow orders. Visions of lavish, gourmet meals flashed through his mind as he resolved to pursue true culinary satisfaction. Driven by this newfound resolve, he shouted with passionate intensity that he would cook for his own sake, announcing his intention to prepare a proper pot-au-feu. The small imp watched in sheer confusion as he burned with dramatic enthusiasm. Setting up a makeshift outdoor kitchen with fresh sausages, carrots, and onions, he fondly declared that pot-au-feu was the ultimate comfort dish from his days at the orphanage. Unimpressed, his companion grumbled in the background that she preferred curry and complained about him taking her sausage in the past. As he chopped the ingredients and tended the boiling pot, he passionately explained that the orphanage's version was made only of leftover scraps, making it his lifelong dream to cook it with high-grade produce and clear spring water. Before the stew could simmer, the little demon grabbed him by the collar, furiously demanding curry instead, until a sudden commotion downstream caught his attention and knocked him off balance. Looking toward the river in utter shock, he gasped as he saw Iris floating helplessly down the rushing water, glowing softly amidst the current. He quickly pulled her out of the water, asking if she was all right and what had happened, to which she bashfully admitted how embarrassing it was to be found in such a helpless state. Sitting near the crackling campfire, she explained that a mistake while practicing magic near Minerva had washed her downstream, a distance he silently calculated to be nearly 2 hours by horse carriage. Her expression grew troubled as she thought of her companions back home, worried sick that they were likely panicking over her sudden disappearance. Offering a swift solution, he cast a spell to dry her soaked clothing before warmly inviting her to share the meal he was cooking, an offer she accepted with genuine relief. However, as the conversation turned to favorite foods, the tiny demon chimed in to mention curry, causing him to suddenly realize in sheer horror what he had actually cooked in the pot. Dramatic tears welled up in his eyes as he wallowed in self-pity over ruining his own meal, leaving her completely startled by his sudden emotional outburst. Taking a spoon to taste the dish despite his dramatics, she took a small bite and immediately reassured him that it tasted wonderful. With a radiant and encouraging smile, she praised his cooking skills, completely lifting his spirits. Blushing with relief, he managed to stammer out a heartfelt thank you for her unexpected kindness. As she happily continued eating, she casually mentioned that curry happened to be the favorite meal of her childhood friend, a skilled mage named Ruby. She continued to speak warmly of her friend Ruby, praising the alchemist's grand ambition to become the finest in the kingdom. In contrast, she humbly viewed herself as a mere helper who simply followed instructions, contrasting her own perceived inadequacy with his admirable habit of helping others. Offering him gentle encouragement, she emphasized that regardless of whether paths diverged, the genuine aid he provided to others remained a wonderful quality. Her reassuring words brought a soft blush to his face as he quietly took in her kindness. A radiant smile swept across her face as she quietly mused aloud how lovely it would be to live a simple, slow life together. Listening thoughtfully while serving the stew, he was caught off guard when she suddenly checked herself and apologized for talking too much. She admitted that she had naively hoped fleeing to Minerva would solve her troubles, only to realize that avoiding her past changed nothing. With a melancholy half-smile, she confessed the solemn reason she had lost her title. She was no longer a saint simply because she had failed to change. A heavy silence fell over the small campsite as he pondered her quiet revelation, neither of them speaking for a poignant moment. Sitting in the quiet forest glade, a sudden realization struck him. Despite their close conversation, he actually knew almost nothing about her background. Prompted by this sudden thought, he abruptly called out to halt her mid-bite. Meanwhile, an invisible observer panicked from afar, watching the scene unfold in disbelief. Lurking behind a tree, Nero gripped his spyglass so tightly it cracked, raging in furious disbelief as he demanded to know what the commoner was feeding to the holy lady. Out in the quiet snowy woods, the young princess laughed softly as she shared stories of her home, recounting how Sophilia had greedily eaten all the food Nero had prepared. Hearing her cheerful tone, he couldn't help but smile, delighted to see how lively she became whenever she spoke about her servants. Their peaceful conversation was suddenly interrupted when a neatly dressed maid appeared through the snow, calling out in search of the princess. Approaching the pair, she introduced herself as Teru, the head maid, and offered a polite bow to express her sincere gratitude for everything he had done to assist her mistress. She went on to explain that she had traveled there to deliver items Sophilia had left behind, before asking where the rest of their party was. In response, the princess admitted they had been separated along the way. Upon hearing this, her expression darkened instantly into a stern scolding, as she fiercely reprimanded the princess for recklessly attempting high-level magic, leaving both of them trembling in sheer terror. Deeply remorseful, the young princess explained her longing to master magic so she could support others without being a burden as a saint, even while internally fearing her head made severe disciplinary methods. Sensing an opportunity to resolve the situation, he spoke up directly to the maid, offering to take full responsibility for teaching the princess magic himself. Delighted by his bold offer, the head maid readily entrusted her mistress to his guidance, while the princess beamed with excitement at the prospect of becoming his student. As she watched from afar, the young princess remained blissfully unaware that her companions were keeping a vigilant eye on her from up high, scanning the surrounding clearing for any signs of danger. Observing the makeshift campsite, Nero found nothing suspicious except for a simple desk and outdoor cooking utensils, leaving him outraged at the mere thought of his lady consuming an amateurish meal. His outrage turned to sheer disbelief when he caught the head maid casually eating from a bowl, though she calmly insisted she was merely testing the food for poison. Frustrated, he turned to ask for a demonstration of holy knight swordsmanship, only to be offered a weak-late radish instead of a weapon. Ignoring his exasperation, the maid declared the dish utterly delicious, even comparing its rich flavor to Nero's own cooking. Compelled by his duty as her personal chef to know everything she consumed, he reluctantly took a spoonful of the curry for himself. The moment the flavor hit his tongue, his eyes widened in utter shock as a wave of intense culinary realization washed over him. He experienced a divine vision of perfection, forced to admit that the harmonious spice blend, flawless grain texture, and exquisite preparation matched the standard of an imperial banquet. Yet behind that sublime taste, he detected something sinister and unnerving, leaving him convinced that such terrifying mastery made the cook a dangerous anomaly. Unaware of the chef's growing hostility and dark resolve to eliminate the threat, Lloyd continued guiding Iris by the river, patiently explaining how to summon and enlarge a water vortex. Standing along the roaring riverbank, the young mage guided his royal pupil, receiving a resolute vow of dedication as she braced herself for the lesson ahead. With a swift spell invocation, he unleashed a pressurized water bullet that struck the river current with explosive force, causing the anxious observers on the shore to recoil in shock. Deeply inspired by the display, she eagerly pledged to do whatever it took to master the technique, prompting her protective noble escort to interject and insist on staying by her side throughout the intense session. Observing their dramatic reaction, he paused to quietly contemplate his own past, searching his memories for the exact moment he had acquired high-tier water dragon magic. A harrowing memory surfaced of collapsing under a punishing desert sun while facing monstrous beasts, convincing him that such life-threatening ordeals were far too brutal to impose on the young princess. Meanwhile, downstream, the scheming nobleman and his maid conducted a quick perimeter check, ensuring the princess was safely out of harm's way before proceeding with their hidden objective. Determined to eliminate what he perceived as a dangerous threat, the nobleman ordered an immediate strike against the young mage, despite his maid's panicked attempts to negotiate for more of his legendary cooking. Acknowledging the stern directive, the skilled maid drew her weapon with lethal precision, her gaze turning ice-cold. With an explosive rush of speed, she unleashed the devastating radish slash, cleaving through the riverbank and causing the startled princess to cry out in terror. Reacting effortlessly, he summoned the roaring surge of the water dragon spell to wash away the sudden attack, calmly noting its practical usefulness for controlling flash floods as the watery torrent swept his aggressors off their feet. He looked on in surprise as the soaked pair washed up on the riverbank, bickering fiercely over who was to blame for eating the radish and starting the mess. Before their argument could escalate any further, a sudden rumble reverberated through the riverbed as an enormous shadowy mass began to rise from beneath the currents. A colossal legion fish violently breached the surface, its massive scale threatening to swallow the area whole as he reacted instantly, summoning a concentrated flame arrow. Despite the direct magical hit, the relentless horde of deadly aquatic beasts refused to halt their rapid advance toward the helpless group. Analyzing the battlefield, he realized that sweeping the swarm with large-scale explosion or lightning magic would inadvertently injure his companions caught in the crossfire. Taking the initiative, Iris stepped forward and unleashed her ice spear magic to freeze the water, determined to buy time for everyone. Although her spell succeeded in freezing the surface, he quickly warned that it created new attack paths, just as a volley of spiked monsters ambushed them from above. Demonstrating selfless bravery, the loyal maid leaped into the line of fire, using her own body to block the lethal barrage of flying spiky projectiles aimed at her allies. As the brave girl took the brunt of the strike and tumbled into the waters, Iris cried out in absolute horror. Refusing to let her fall in vain, the group immediately retaliated against the remaining beasts with fierce magical blasts, while frantically checking if everyone was safe. She cried out in horror as her faithful protector collapsed onto the icy shore, battered by the barrage. Standing alone amid the icy spray, the princess stared in utter disbelief at the tragic sight before her. Horror turned to panic as she watched her companion drift helplessly into the churning waters, her hand reaching out uselessly toward the distance. Refusing to give up, she channeled her holy mana to invoke a colossal water dragon, shaping the torrent itself into a towering beast. With fierce resolve shining in her eyes, she declared that while she hated seeing anyone suffer, she could no longer stand by and remain helpless. The onlookers watched in awe and apprehension as her magical construct surged across the battlefield to reach the unconscious maid. Enveloping the fallen maid in a protective sphere of swirling liquid, the dragon gently lifted her out of the icy depths and brought her safely back to shore. Seeing the miraculous retrieval succeed, Lloyd gasped in relief while the exhausted princess stumbled back onto her knees in the shallow water. Without losing a single moment, the entire party rushed across the frozen terrain toward where the injured maid was laid down. Cradling her wounded friend in her arms, Iris anxiously checked if she was all right, only to hear the maid softly whisper praise for her breathtaking spell. She beamed with pure, radiant joy as she cradled Sophilia on the riverbank. Her face lit up with relief while the others looked on. Observing her warmth, Lloyd reflected on how his own magic had been mastered merely for self-preservation, whereas Iris had honed her specifically to protect those she held dear. Still holding her companion close, Iris smiled down with deep affection, immeasurably relieved that her maid was safe and unharmed. Watching this heartwarming display, he marveled quietly to himself at how truly remarkable she was. His thoughts were suddenly broken as Nero stepped forward, calling out to grab his attention. Nero offered a sincere apology for his earlier hasty attack, expressing genuine gratitude to Lloyd for saving his life moments prior. Turning toward the group, Sophilia presented Lloyd with a meticulously prepared, remarkably fresh sashimi platter crafted from the defeated Legion fish as a token of appreciation. As Lloyd and Nero reacted in stunned amazement at the elaborate offering, Sophilia turned to Iris to voice her overwhelming thanks, promising to repay her kindness, though Iris humbly tried to downplay her role. Before anyone could react, Iris suddenly darted forward and lunged straight into Lloyd, wrapping her arms tightly around him in an unexpected embrace. His eyes widened in shock as she hugged him closely, looking up at him with tears of gratitude in her eyes as she offered her heartfelt thanks. He stood quietly as Iris wept tears of relief, overwhelmed with gratitude that she had agreed to teach him magic, just as a sudden blast shot up into the sky nearby. Following the sudden outburst, quiet returned to the surrounding forest, where their portable cooking equipment sat resting under the soft evening light. Sitting down together, the group turned their attention to the legion fish, noting that such a high-class monster rarely, if ever, ventured anywhere near the region of Minerva. Nero pondered whether it was merely an extraordinary coincidence, though the others remained skeptical that such dangerous events could be purely accidental. He countered immediately, reminding them that during his short stay in Minerva, he had already been forced to slay both a sandworm and a griffin, proving this was a clear anomaly. Continuing his explanation, he mentioned that the griffin had attacked right at the Temple of Winds, leading Nero to suspect that the temple's holy barrier had somehow weakened. However, Nero quickly reconsidered, stating that the situation smelled highly suspicious, as holy temples were meant to possess the absolute strongest defenses against monster incursions. Aware that something grave was unfolding at the Temple of Winds, he grew grim, knowing that their path would inevitably lead them back to where the trouble first. Within the sacred traditions of the realm, a saintess holds the vital duty of channeling her holy magical energy to maintain the protective barriers surrounding their nation's shrines, shielding the land from formidable monsters. Reflecting on this divine mechanism, Nero pointed out that the Temple of Winds lay just beyond the dense forest, while the group realized that a high-tier monster appearing near the shrine meant something terrible must have occurred at the temple itself. Looking out toward the ancient towers, the grim reality became undeniable. A massive breach had ruptured through the magical barriers surrounding the shrine's grounds. Gathering outside near the rubble, the companions realized they were not the only ones who had sensed the sudden shift in atmosphere. Hurrying over to them, Syphilia urgently inquired if Lloyd and Iris were unharmed, her eyes widening in worry as she noticed their injuries. She explained that their group had barely managed to fend off a ferocious horde of 3 griffins, but warned that the chaotic battle had likely drawn another wave of beasts toward them. Surveying the massive crater left in the battle's wake, she inquired about the saintess who had been seen previously, only to receive a somber confirmation that she was nowhere to be found. The group noted that because the saintess was currently stationed at the most distant shrine, a formal investigation into the griffin outbreak had been requested, though her return could take up to 2 full weeks. Refusing to wait in inaction, Iris declared with quiet resolve that she would venture into the depths of the shrine herself to perform the necessary cleansing ritual. She turned to the young assistant mage with a humble request, asking if he would grant her a favor by escorting her to perform the sacred cleansing ritual required to restore the region's failing barrier. Recognizing her own physical vulnerability in battle, the maiden urged him further, explaining that having a mage of his immense caliber along would guarantee the expedition's success into the shrine's perilous core. Though reluctant to step aside as her primary protector, the silver-haired guard yielded with a tight frown, acknowledging in silence that the young wizard's strength was undeniable. As the group began their trek, the conversation took an eccentric turn when the topic of subterranean sustenance arose, with Alchemia excitedly praising the culinary potential of subterranean beetles. Before them opened a monumental cavern featuring a stone spiral staircase that plummeted into breathtaking subterranean depths. Navigating the descent, the party exchanged quiet warnings, fully aware that dangerous beasts had likely breached the upper halls and taken roost below. Step by step down the narrow ledge, the young mage took point, scanning the gloom to ensure no ambush targeted the saintess behind him. Behind him, the guard grumbled about sinister auric signatures radiating from the traveler's rations, prompting the rest of the group to laugh off his paranoia. Cutting through the banter, the maiden beamed with radiant optimism, expressing complete confidence that their newfound protector would bring peace to their troubled realm. Suddenly, monstrous insectoid predators plummeted from the shadowy ceiling. Reacting in a heartbeat, the assistant mage unleashed a blistering bolt of lightning to repel the surprise attack. He watched in astonishment as the young saintess recognized the cavernous beast, a colossal king beetle. Before the monster could strike, Syphilia charged ahead, drawing her blade in a swift flash to cleave the creature cleanly in two with a holy slash. Astonished by her swordplay, the young mage compared Syphilia's skill to that of Isolde, while Iris blithely requested that they cook one of the monster's giant legs. Carrying a hefty portion of the roasted beetle leg, he offered it to Iris, pointing out its massive size due to the creature's high rank. leaving her staring at the huge serving in stunned disbelief. Overcome with unexpected grief for the slain creature, the former holy knight dropped to her knees in despair, leaving her companions completely bewildered by her sudden emotional outburst. Stepping in to take charge, Nero took the meat, explaining that removing the slime and using strong spices would neutralize any foul odor, while Lloyd suggested cutting the portion into smaller pieces to make it easier to consume. After the meal was skillfully prepared and seasoned, the young saintess took her first bite, her eyes sparkling with delight as she declared the dish utterly mouth-watering. Just as the companions were celebrating how delicious the monster meat tasted, Roland burst into the room in a full sprint, calling out frantically that urgent danger was upon them. Through a frantic magical transmission, an ally warned them that a massive swarm of high-tier monsters was surging toward their location, begging them to construct a magical barrier immediately before their front lines collapsed. Understanding the extreme urgency of the situation, the group hastened their pace, charging down the shadowy stone corridors of the ancient shrine. As they hurried through the ruins, Nero reluctantly praised the flavor of the dish, haughtily declaring he would not give his full approval until he learned its secret. Though Lloyd clarified, he simply wanted to learn the proper techniques for cooking monster meat himself. Standing alongside his allies, the young knight braced himself as a ferocious minotaur burst into view. High Priestess Isolde raised her hands to channel her holy power, while Sophilia surged forward to intercept the towering beast before it could strike. Working in flawless synchronization, the party unleashed a swift counteroffensive. Lloyd conjured intricate magical crests beneath his feet. Sophilia carved through the remaining foes with her blade, and Nero maintained a watchful guard with his weapon ready. With the immediate threat cleared, the companions stepped through the clearing smoke, striding together down the grand stone corridor toward their final objective. Pointing toward a massive set of ornate doors ahead, Isolde announced that the entrance led directly into the cleansing ritual room. Observing Iris's earnest demeanor, Lloyd mused aloud that he finally understood her dedication to learning magic, recognizing that she wished to fight side by side as an equal partner. Hearing his optimistic words, the stoic knight quietly interjected from behind, blunt in his assessment that such a perspective was overly naive. Lloyd glanced back in mild surprise, startled by the unexpected critique. Casting her gaze downward, High Priestess Isolde murmured softly that matters were far more complex than simple teamwork. Her solemn reaction only deepened the young mage's confusion as he wondered what burden she was carrying. Passing through the grand archway, they stepped into a colossal, high-vaulted sanctuary anchored by an intricate magical seal in the center, prompting Lloyd to inquire whether this was the precise location where the protective barriers were erected. Moving ahead onto the sacred emblem, she requested that the group remain vigilant and guard her back while she initiated the cleansing ritual. The companions followed close behind, spreading out to secure the vast hall. Before the ceremony could begin, a sudden, violent impact shattered the silence, sending shockwaves across the stone floor. Sensing immediate danger, Sophilia instantly drew her blade and leaped into a defensive stance to protect Isolde, while Lloyd whirled around in shock. A lethal blade slammed into the stone right at the young mage's feet as a rain of daggers descended from above. As maniacal laughter echoed through the cavernous chamber, he gasped in realization that an unseen assassin had launched an ambush. He stared in disbelief as the masked intruder descended from above, cackling maniacally and declaring that a lucrative bounty had been placed on the fake Sainus's head. Recognizing the foe immediately, Nero shouted that this was an assassin sent from Roland, while the realization that Iris was an active target sank in with rising alarm. Moments after her boastful declaration that resistance was futile, the attacker's frantic acrobatics ended abruptly when she crashed face-first onto the cold stone floor, leaving the group standing in stunned silence as Nero hesitantly questioned if they had truly subdued her so easily. The brief sense of relief proved short-lived when a voice echoed from above, mocking their triumph and revealing that the fallen attacker was merely the weakest of her clones. As Nero gasped, a lineup of identical masked assassins materialized along the upper ledge, surrounding the party with glinting daggers and sinister grins. While Lloyd and his companions faced a mysterious assassin below the temple, Chaos erupted on the surface as panic-stricken allies struggled to hold their ground. Syphilia urged her allies to pull themselves together and fight, warning that giving up meant certain defeat. Amidst the rising terror, soldiers trembled at the sight of the colossal land eater, a high-level monster capable of destroying everything in its path. As some prepared to flee in despair, Syphilia barked orders at them, furiously reminding the cowardly men that innocent citizens would be in dire peril if they failed to hold the line. Refusing to back down, she leaped into action, shouting to her comrades that Saintess Iris and the others would soon seal the barrier, urging everyone to endure the onslaught until help arrived. Meanwhile, deep within the quiet halls of the temple below, an attendant looked on in apprehension as Iris concentrated on her duty. Stepping forward to confront the Saintess, the masked assassin adjusted her visor and boldly announced her presence, declaring herself Black Crow, an assassin dispatched from the Holy Roland Kingdom. As the intruder made her grand declaration, Lloyd questioned Iris about the state of the barrier and why she was using her magical clones to fight. Beside him, Nero argued with the masked assassin, exasperated by her theatrical lack of professional secrecy. Maintaining her focus, she explained that a powerful force was interfering with her magic, leaving her barely able to keep the breach from expanding. However, her composure shattered when her eyes landed on the artifact held by Black Crow, recognizing it as the legendary Staff of Holy Destruction, while the assassin's companion futilely scolded her for boasting. Staring in horror at the ancient relic, she demanded to know how they had obtained a weapon that was used 2 centuries ago in the war against demons, one that the Holy Roland Kingdom was supposed to keep under absolute guard. In response, the masked assassin smirked, explaining that after discovering the country's Saintess was away, they orchestrated the entire surface attack as a deliberate trap to lure her out, knowing that as long as the staff disrupted the magic, the barrier hole could never be closed. She stood resolute despite Iris's impassioned plea, holding her ground as the young Saintess condemned her actions for putting countless lives at risk, while Lloyd observed the tense confrontation closely. Refusing to back down, the masked assassin spat back at her critics and lunged forward at blinding speed, targeting the young Saintess directly with twin blades bared. As the assassin's duplicates overwhelmed the battleground, Lloyd realized they were running out of time and cast a protective force shield to hold off the attack, while leaving the offensive push to his companions. Capitalizing on the distraction, Nero unleashed a powerful combined holy sword strike, but the sheer force of the blow sent Syphilia hurtling through the air into the stone floor. Shaken by the terrifying sword aura emanating from the Holy Knight, the assassin acknowledged the overwhelming danger and signaled her copies to execute a secret specialized technique. Enshrouded instantly by a dense smoke screen, Lloyd called out a warning to his companions as Nero and Syphilia prepared to charge through the visual haze. Weaving through the obscuring mist, the assassin deployed an intricate illusion magic aimed directly at trapping Syphilia's mind in an alternate reality of time. Immersed completely in the spell, Syphilia experienced a vivid memory of Nero offering her warm pastries in a peaceful courtyard long before the chaos began. Lying helpless on the stone floor with a vacant smile, Syphilia murmured softly about the food's taste, totally oblivious to the shadowy assassin looming beside her. With her foe completely neutralized by the vision, Black Crow prepared to deliver the decisive strike while Iris wept, realizing the heartbreaking depth of Syphilia's tranquil delusion. She boasted that her illusion technique would manifest her target's deepest desires, expecting a subtle mental trap, but was taken aback when Syphilia's mind conjured an absurd, endless feast. Gloating over her success, the masked assassin laughed as the trap closed around them, claiming no one could ever awaken from such a comfortable dream, leaving Lloyd and Iris looking on in horror. The illusion spread further, ensnaring Nero as well. Lloyd gasped as his protective spell began to shatter, realizing Nero was now caught in a vision where he happily served delicious meals to Iris. Watching the assassin mock their predicament, Lloyd urgently calculated his options, realizing the enemies were targeting Iris and that he might have to undo his defense magic to engage them directly in battle. However, inside the illusion, Nero's passion for cooking took a disturbing turn, as his desire manifested as forcefully cramming dish after dish into Iris's mouth, while praising her appearance, horrifying even the vision of Iris herself. The relentless intensity of Nero's culinary obsessiveness completely overwhelmed the illusionary realm, forcing even the phantom diners to collapse beneath the endless barrage of food. Crushed under the sheer absurdity of his appetite, the assassin's spell shattered entirely, leaving her stunned and cursing the wicked cook before drawing her blade to fight without trickery. Seeing the illusion break, a flash of inspiration struck Lloyd, and he shouted at Nero to start cooking immediately. He reasoned that real food prepared by Nero could snap Sephilia back to her senses, though Nero hesitated, noting that he lacked the necessary ingredients on hand. Reaching into his dimensional storage, Lloyd threw open a glowing magical chest to supply Nero with everything he needed, prompting the reluctant knight to agree to give it a shot. He stood beside Nero, presenting a magnificent dish of leftover curry topped with omuris that left their opponent utterly dumbfounded in the middle of combat. The masked assassin scoffed, confident that such cooking antics could never break her spell, but the irresistible aroma snapped Sephilia back to her senses, freeing her to launch a ferocious blade strike. With a single swift slash, the former holy knight shattered Black Crow's sacred staff into pieces, prompting an enthusiastic cry of victory from the young mage. Black Crow recoiled in utter disbelief that her grand illusion had been bested by mere hunger, while Sephilia wiped her mouth, acknowledging that her voracious appetite had ultimately broken the mind control. Meanwhile, Iris gazed up at the sky, her face brightening with hope as she observed the grand magical barrier beginning to seal itself around the domain. Far across the battlefield, a giant beast prepared a destructive blast, sending nearby fighters into a comedic state of sheer panic as they braced for doom. Before the creature could unleash its attack, the closing barrier abruptly choked out its magic, reducing its terrifying roar to a pathetic squeak. As the ancient barrier fully locked into place above the sprawling city, a collective sigh of relief echoed among the survivors, who realized the threat from outside was finally contained. Turning his attention back to their immediate threat, Lloyd casually pointed out to Black Crow that all her comrades had been defeated, signaling that it was now time for their counterattack. Rather than surrendering, the masked assassin locked eyes with him and let out a quiet, ominous chuckle. She threw her head back in wild laughter as a pillar of blinding light erupted behind her, mockingly pointing out that their fallen enemies were being absorbed into the divine power. Before she could exploit the strange magic, Lloyd channeled extreme speed and physical enhancement into a single, overwhelming strike, dropping her in a fraction of a second. Looking down at his glowing fist, he sheepishly noted that because she appeared so formidable, he had unleashed magic strong enough to subdue high-tier monsters, knocking her completely out cold. With the conflict brought to a swift end, the group gazed toward the distance, where a massive, unknown structure dominated the horizon, sparking immediate confusion. Expressing deep gratitude to the group for protecting the Temple of Wind, Nero informed them that he would personally take the captive assassin to the capital to face trial. Seeking answers before she was taken away, Lloyd confronted the bound assassin directly, questioning why there was an active bounty placed upon Iris. With a cold smirk, she confessed that the Prince of the Holy Roland Kingdom ordered Iris's elimination, as her standing posed a major threat to his grand designs. Pieces of the puzzle suddenly fell into place for Iris, as she realized her sudden exile from her homeland was orchestrated purely to clear the way for political ambitions. She solemnly warned the group that the prince intended to trigger a full-scale war against their nation, a revelation that left Lloyd and his companions in utter disbelief. Turning directly to Lloyd, she pleaded with him to accompany her to the Roland Kingdom's capital to halt the impending invasion, prompting him to consider the dangerous journey ahead. As the carriage rattled along the road, the conversation turned to the rising political tensions. Iris explained that Prince Geese had frequently advocated for seizing neighboring territories, claiming it was necessary to bolster their military strength against the demonic threat. She recalled standing up against his aggressive posture, pointing out that invading peaceful lands was no different from the demonic onslaught that had devastated the world centuries ago. Her opposition had cost her dearly, resulting in her banishment under the false pretense of being an imposter, though she feared this was merely the opening move in a much larger conflict. Sophilia proposed securing an audience with the ruler of Melzaria, prompting Iris to suggest forming a coalition among neighboring lands to deter Roland's aggressive ambitions. Despite the gravity of their strategic discussion, Lloyd was completely incapacitated by severe motion sickness, barely able to murmur a response as Iris checked on his well-being. Shortly after, the carriage arrived at the capital of the Melzaria Kingdom, a grand city defined by towering, extravagant architecture that left the young saintess in awe. In this realm, elegance was paramount, as Queen Isolde valued refined aesthetics above all else, prompting her court subjects to dress in lavishly flamboyant attire. Upon entering the throne room, Sophilia respectfully greeted Queen Isolde, who praised the former holy knight for successfully defending the Temple of Winds against the assassin known as Black Crow. She expressed her gratitude for their sudden arrival, acknowledging that disaster had been averted in an impeccably elegant manner before Iris stepped forward to deliver critical news. Her expression hardened into intense concentration as she processed Iris's warning, questioning if Roland truly intended to initiate an all-out war against Melzaria. She listened in silence as whispered rumors rippled through the royal court, with nobles questioning Prince Guise's exile of Lady Iris and wondering who currently held the title of saint. The court's attention soon turned toward Lloyd, with Queen Isolde herself viewing him as rather plain and failing to recognize him despite past meetings, while others whispered in disbelief at his infamous 40% material collection rate. Whispers grew louder as some acknowledged him as the mage who had defeated the infamous Black Crow, though skeptical aristocrats scoffed at the idea, refusing to believe such a seemingly ordinary assistant could accomplish such a feat. Hearing the nobleman hurl insults at her companion infuriated Iris, while Sophilia gritted her teeth in anger, appalled by the court's utter ignorance of Lloyd's true strength. Interrupting the petty chatter, Queen Isolde suddenly declared with ringing authority that their entire demeanor was utterly lacking in elegance. She unfolded her decorative fan, lecturing the gathered nobles that true elegance required steadfast composure in the face of sudden surprises, especially when evaluating someone capable of capturing a deadly crow. A subtle, knowing smirk crossed her lips as she resolved to test Lloyd directly, eager to see if he possessed the genuine power required to overcome an assassin of Black Crow's stature. Without warning, the kingdom's most flamboyant warrior, Dandelion, made a dramatic entrance in full feathered regalia, challenging Lloyd to prove his elegance in combat before the bewildered onlookers. A chaotic clash erupted instantly, forcing Lloyd to defend himself against the assault while trapped in an utterly absurd outfit. Looking around mid-chaos, Lloyd was shocked to see Sophilia and their companions clad in equally ridiculous animal and bunny costumes, leaving everyone questioning each other's ridiculous attire amidst the madness. He watched in bewilderment as the absurd battle unfolded around him, his companions trading chaotic commands and bizarre combat instructions amidst the clashing steel. With a dazzling explosion of flower petals, the Knight Commander unleashed his extravagant ultimate attack, declaring victory over his current opponents and demanding the next challenger. Seeing their turn arrive, Iris turned to him with quiet frustration, expressing that she could no longer endure hearing the onlookers insult his reputation. Urging him to step forward, she reminded him of his true strength as the hero who had saved Minerva, inspiring him to steel his resolve for the fight. Dressed in his ridiculous floral outfit, he charged headlong at the formidable knight, determined to prove his skill despite the absurd conditions imposed upon him. Meanwhile, inside the quiet palace corridors, Alchemia paid little heed to the commotion outside, turning her attention entirely to her own crucial encounter. Stepping into a secluded chamber, she bowed respectfully to master-class Mage Crowley, greeting the legendary figure with exaggerated politeness. The Grand Archmage modestly brushed off her formality, remarking pleasantly on how convenient long-distance travel had become thanks to modern carriages. Though now enjoying a peaceful, quiet life in the countryside, Crowley remained renowned as one of the legendary heroes who defeated the Demon King 2 centuries ago, while maintaining his position at the apex of the Magic Association. Offering him a tray of homemade cookies, Alchemia secretly schemed to win his favor, believing that aligning with such a legendary mage would secure her unlimited requests and vast wealth. She watched anxiously as the Archmage took a bite of her concoction, only for his stoic face to falter at the jarring taste. A sudden explosion of unexpected magic forced him to cough in astonishment. Analyzing the recipe in his head, Crowley identified the volatile combination of King Papamu and Flame Elixir mixed with a touch of sugar. While she proudly defended her attempt to infuse instant protection magic with a kick of spicy flavor, the Master Archmage dryly questioned why anyone would include explosive ingredients in something intended to taste good. Setting the treat aside, he handed over a thick stack of backlogged ingredient requests, expressing relief that an alchemist had finally arrived to fetch them. Examining the top document, he highlighted a request for Fleur d'Incel, a legendary phantom flower that only bloomed within the uncharted depths of Area Zero. She gasped in utter disbelief at the sheer absurdity of the task, knowing that gathering rare flora from dangerous zones took weeks. Yet he casually asked if she could complete the order by tomorrow. To ease her panic, he revealed a hidden passage containing a magic circle inscribed by her predecessor, explaining that it would teleport her directly to the vicinity of the target region. Approaching the glowing arcane sigil, she marveled at seeing a real teleportation circle for the very first time, wondering aloud why such extraordinary magic was not commonly utilized. Turning back to face her with a stern expression, Crowley acknowledged her passion for potion making, but criticized her reckless naivety regarding the world's dangers. He grimly warned her that the unexplored wilderness was a brutal graveyard where an army of 1,000 fully armored knights could easily be wiped out in a single night. He watched her reaction as she laughed nervously in utter disbelief, unable to fathom thousands perishing in a single night. She reasoned that such extreme danger couldn't be true, recalling how her former assistant had always effortlessly retrieved every rare material she requested. Hearing her logic, the Master Mage calmly stated that if her claims were genuine, then Lloyd possessed power far beyond his own, a figure worthy of being called a Chronicle-class mage. As the weight of this revelation hung in the air, Alchemia froze in shock while memories of Lloyd's tireless efforts flashed through her mind. The notion that her humble assistant was in reality a mage capable of matching ancient legends felt almost impossible to accept. Silence fell between them in the quiet study as he watched her process the staggering truth. Attempting to offer solace, he praised her own latent talents, gently assuring her that with time, she possessed the potential to become an alchemist on par with Lloyd. Yet his encouraging words inadvertently triggered deeply buried wounds, bringing back painful memories of past cruelties and feelings of incompetence. Driven to an outburst by her rising anguish, she pointed forcefully at him and shouted that he was merely making excuses for his own shortcomings. Her bitter tirade continued unabated as she openly mocked legendary heroes and demanded to know if he felt any shame claiming to be the realm's greatest mage. He stood tall as a fiery aura erupted from his body, his voice brimming with fury as he declared that he would never overlook insults directed at his comrades. Despite the suffocating pressure, she stubbornly refused to back down, shouting at him and calling him incompetent while her companion desperately urged her to take back her words. Before the argument could escalate any further, he suddenly gasped and coughed up a violent spray of blood and smoke, leaving her utterly paralyzed with horror. Witnessing the sudden physical breakdown of the Grand Mage, she let out a piercing scream of pure panic. He collapsed heavily onto the cold floor face first, trails of smoke continuing to drift lazily from his mouth as she stared down in shocked silence. A sudden, horrifying realization struck her. The volatile magical reaction between her explosive alchemical treat and his inner mana had literally caused him to detonate internally. Outside the royal chambers, her frantic shrieks echoed through the corridors, causing the station guards to jump in confusion at the sound of the blast. Far away from the commotion, snow fell softly over the towering spires and grand cathedral architecture of the Holy Kingdom of Roland. Inside the sacred halls, an elder church official recoiled in disbelief upon receiving news of Black Crow's defeat, raging over having entrusted such a powerful holy relic to an unreliable mercenary. Dropping his ceremonial cane with a sharp clatter, the official narrowed his eyes, uttering the saintess's name as he weighed their next strategic move. Inside the Grand Cathedral of Roland, The church official declared with stern conviction that avoiding conflict was merely delaying the inevitable, insisting that the complete unification of the Western continent was the sole foundation for true peace. Meanwhile, back at the lively town celebration, the young mage scratched his head in mild embarrassment. While high officials plotted grand continental schemes, the chaotic momentum behind the festive surface was accelerating rapidly. Queen Isolde, relaxing in a luxurious bath, laughed merrily and praised Lloyd's unexpected talents, remarking on how surprisingly refined he was. Wearing a floral wreath around his neck, he blushed nervously as she suggested he adopt such attire regularly to ensure he would never be looked down upon again. Attendants and advisors surrounding the bath expressed their amazement at Iris's story and the remarkable skills displayed. Hearing their awe, Her Majesty declared that she would immediately call a formal council meeting to devise a strategic plan. Maintaining her composure, she firmly requested that her army not be mobilized, insisting that the assault on the Temple of Winds was merely a deliberate provocation by the Holy Roland Kingdom. She emphasized that avoiding direct military action was the most graceful path, as she had no desire to drag innocent citizens into the flames of war. Outlining a diplomatic alternative, the Queen explained that although it would place a strain on their own populace, they would partner with allied nations to enforce strict trade restrictions against Roland instead, prompting Lloyd to listen in quiet gratitude. Rising from the water, she reminded the room that no matter what measures were taken, the overarching crisis could never truly be resolved unless they brought an end to Prince Guise's schemes. After leaving the royal presence, Nero generously offered his family's luxurious vacation estate as lodging for the group, while Lloyd quietly wondered if Iris had been silently agonizing over Prince Guise this entire time. With their immediate duties completed, the companions unexpectedly suggested taking the evening off and entrusted Iris entirely to Lloyd's care for the day, leaving both of them wide-eyed with shock. As Sophilia departed toward the local adventurers' guild, she cheerfully encouraged the two of them to make the most of their free time and enjoy exploring the town together. With their companions having departed, the young mage and the saintess strolled along the stone-paved streets of the capital. Seeking a comfortable spot to talk, he brought up the prince, curious to know if the ruler had been a terrifying figure. She paused, reflecting on the word. He was not terrifying, she explained, but rather desperate, a man who sought peace for the world, yet held a philosophy fundamentally at odds with her own. The memory of their clashes resurfaced, recalling how the military commanders insisted on conquering surrounding heathen lands to fortify against an impending demon invasion, while she argued that such aggression made them no different from the demons themselves. She had warned him that even if he successfully unified the land under his rule, his ambition would be paid for in countless meaningless lives. In response, he had snapped back, asserting that such extreme measures were only necessary because her holy barriers lacked the strength to protect the realm on their own. Hearing the heavy burden she had carried, he offered her his quiet sympathy. Overwhelmed by emotion, she bowed apologetically for bringing up such grim topics, but he quickly assured her that no apology was needed. Stepping away from the somber past, they continued their walk through the vibrant market square as children darted happily around them. Their stroll led them to a grand magical traveling fair, complete with floating balloons and massive mechanical rides. Staring up at a looming roller coaster, she admitted she had always dreamed of riding one ever since it visited her hometown in her youth. Moments later, they were hurtling down the steep tracks at terrifying speeds. As she clung on in sheer panic, he found the experience oddly familiar, likening the sensation to holding onto a wild dragon for an entire day during combat. Upon stepping off the ride, he marveled at the mechanical engineering behind the attraction. Meanwhile, she stood trembling from severe motion sickness, forcing both of them to realize that surviving constant life-or-death battles rendered mundane thrills far less overwhelming. She stood stunned alongside Lloyd, realizing that the roller coaster's erratic motion was caused by a towering, muscular man manually powering the gears with a massive wooden log. Confronting the muscular warrior, Dandelion, Lloyd asked what he was doing, only to be told it was a dual-purpose workout that also brought joy to the visiting children. When a child spoke down to Lloyd, Dandelion gently chided the boy and lifted him onto his shoulders, assuring everyone that Lloyd was actually far stronger than himself. Bidding them farewell, the warrior casually wished them a pleasant date as he departed, leaving the pair flustered before Lloyd suggested it was time to head back. As they walked together through the peaceful streets with the grand citadel in the background, a quiet mood fell over them. Lloyd asked her whether she intended to resume her duties as Roland's saint or seek a peaceful life elsewhere once the war was stopped, prompting her to share the story of her past. She explained that upon demonstrating a natural affinity for holy magic in infancy, she had been placed in an academy alongside other candidates, dispelling the belief that only one potential saint existed at a time. Wielding holy power carried the immense responsibility of maintaining the nation's barrier, making the training rigorous and high-stakes for all candidates involved. To earn the right to undergo the final consecration ceremony, a candidate had to excel completely in history, prayer, and politics, a standard that she had proudly achieved as a top pupil. Listening to her account, Lloyd expressed profound admiration for her immense effort, to which she softly replied that her dedication stemmed from a deep desire to protect the people she held dear. Her thoughts drifted back to the gentle people of her homeland in Roland, her mother selling goods at the market, her brothers laboring in the fields, and her night father visiting her at school. Even after her dispute with the prince escalated to the point of her exile, those memories remained a source of warmth. Because of that past, she knew she had never been truly alone, for loyal comrades had stood by her, believing in her innocence and rescuing her from despair. With a gentle smile, she admitted that while returning to her former duties as a saintess might be difficult, her true longing was simply to live alongside the people she held dear. Standing beside Lloyd under the quiet starlit sky, she softly confessed her deepest vulnerability, that she could not endure the pain of being alone. Moved to tears by her heartfelt confession, he wiped his eyes, deeply impressed by her selfless spirit after all the hardship she had faced. Looking directly at her with unwavering resolve, he pledged with all his heart that he would do whatever it took to make her happy. Overwhelmed by his sincere promise, she quietly thanked him as the night settled peacefully over the grand estate. Moments later, the intimate mood yielded to lively celebration inside the hall, where Roland blew a festive horn to congratulate everyone on completing their long journey to the capital. Gathered around a sumptuous full-course feast prepared by Roland and the team, the group engaged in chaotic, joyful banter, bringing a warm smile to Lloyd and Iris as they enjoyed the lively gathering. He agreed with a warm smile, promising that once all their struggles were finally behind them, they would gather everyone to celebrate a fresh beginning together. Standing in the center of the illuminated hall, the group sealed their heartfelt oath to one another while the rest of their companions looked on, sharing in the quiet warmth of the moment. Meanwhile, beneath the pale glow of the crescent moon, rumors swirled outside a secluded prison block regarding the sudden arrest of the high-ranking alchemist, Ruby, whose fallen status had allegedly driven her to attack a prominent mage out of sheer desperation. Confined behind heavy iron bars, Alchemia ground her teeth in fury, seething as she listened to the baseless lies being spread about her circumstances. Unable to contain her rage, she threw a furious tantrum inside the damp cell, outraged that no one from the aristocracy had come to her defense while the surrounding prisoners wailed around her. Glancing toward her strange cellmates, she was stunned to find them composed of bickering, masked operatives who were openly lamenting their failed assassination mission and complaining about being hungry. One of the masked figures turned to inspect her, asking if she was indeed the kingdom's top alchemist, to which she answered with proud defiance. Grasping the iron bars, the operative abruptly proposed that she join forces with them to meet Roland. The cell instantly erupted into chaos as the masked captives squabbled over her potential value, leaving Alchemia utterly bewildered by their absurdity and terrifying talk of execution. Before their bickering could escalate any further, Black Crow casually picked the lock of the prison door, swinging it wide open to Alchemia's absolute disbelief. She noted that even after escaping the cell, reaching the border would still be a long and treacherous journey. Alchemia, however, was entirely undeterred, admitting that the challenge only fired her up. Pointing out that magic would simplify matters, Alchemia revealed that her personal atelier housed a hidden teleportation circle they could utilize. As the masked assassin inquired about the atelier's location, Alchemia stepped forward to lead the way, privately scheming to act as though she had merely been dragged into the breakout against her will. Behind them, alarm bells clanged loudly through the night as guards discovered the empty cell, while whispers of revenge and false accusations echoed into the dark capital sky. As the long night finally passed, the sun began its quiet ascent over the distant mountains. At the Grand Royal Estate, the peaceful morning routine in the kitchen was abruptly interrupted by a messenger requesting everyone to gather in the reception hall. Surprised by the sudden summons before breakfast had even been prepared, Lloyd and Nero walked down the quiet hallway, wondering what urgent news required their presence. Upon stepping into the meeting room, they encountered an unusually solemn atmosphere among those already gathered around the central table. Iris greeted him with a deeply troubled expression, delivering the alarming news that a vital figure in the royal capital had nearly been assassinated. She added that the prime suspect had fled together with Black Crow, and that the imperial garrisons stationed along the border were currently under heavy assault. She delivered the dire proclamation without hesitation. The nation of Roland had officially launched a full-scale invasion of Malzeria. What was intended to be a peaceful morning preparing breakfast had instantly dissolved into an alarming crisis, as flames of war threatened to engulf the... Iris reflects dejectedly on her past choices, admitting to the group that her actions seemed to have only worsened the situation. She explains that she failed to comprehend the full gravity of the prince's determination until Black Crow's arrival forced her to leave Roland. Determined to make amends, she announces her intent to travel back to Roland and reason with the prince directly. Even as Black Crow warns that the royal army has already reached the border and that a joint journey is too risky, she insists on going alone if necessary to stop the impending conflict. As she expresses her heartfelt gratitude before taking her leave, Lloyd suddenly interrupts with a sudden realization. He proposes a much safer alternative route back to Roland, suggesting they make use of the secret teleportation circle inside the atelier. However, his suggestion brings with it the terrifying prospect of confronting Ruby, causing Black Crow to react with aggressive panic as she demands he clarify his idea. At the mere mention of her name, he begins to shake violently and choke on his words, alarming everyone present. Overwhelmed by intense dread, he collapses to the floor, foaming at the mouth from acute anxiety. Moments later, as he rests unconscious on a nearby sofa, the group looks on in astonishment, realizing his terror of Ruby was so extreme that it knocked him out before he could finish his explanation. As he lay unconscious, the Saintess stared down at him with heavy guilt, wishing she could peek inside his mind and regretting how hard she had pushed him. Hearing her wish, Her Majesty produced a strange pair of eye-adorned frames seized from demons, introducing a magical tool named Enter One's Mind. The assassin cook explained that by wearing the device while sleeping beside someone, one could project their consciousness directly into the target's dreamscape, much like her own hypnosis spells. Without hesitation, the young maiden stepped forward to take on the task, ignoring the queen's warning about the unpredictable dangers of entering another's subconscious. Politely excusing herself, she lay down next to him on the bed and donned the relic, while the guards agreed to wait outside and intervene only if they failed to awaken. Opening her eyes inside his mindscape, she found herself in a grand circular hall resembling the atelier, where a monstrous, sharp-toothed iteration of Ruby was fiercely berating a terrified miniature version of him. The terrifying phantom mercilessly kicked and insulted him, calling his ancestors sluggish as he curled into a ball of despair, apologizing to his friends for his own perceived worthlessness. Unable to watch any longer, she confronted the creature, shouting in defense of his incredible abilities, only for the entity to aggressively assert her claim as his true friend. The phantom shrieked that his gathering rate was a failure and that he deserved to be treated like a slave, causing him to helplessly accept the abuse, while she declared such cruelty completely unforgivable. She unleashed a powerful water dragon spell to blast the creature away, but the nightmare entity instantly recovered and counterattacked with overwhelming physical force, forcing her to realize that raw magic alone could not defeat a projection inside a realm of imagination. She watched in anguish as Lloyd broke down, whimpering that he was hopeless and terrified of Ruby despite everyone's advice, begging her to leave him behind, a request she adamantly refused. tears streaming down her cheeks. She implored him to ask for help whenever he faced an insurmountable obstacle, reminding him to lean on his companions rather than shoulder the blame alone. Reaching out into the light, she reminded him of all the times he had saved her and urged him to take her hand, breaking his mental paralysis as their fingers finally clasped together. Empowered by her fierce determination within his mindscape, her spiritual presence swelled into a towering giant that effortlessly plucked up the terrified phantom of Ruby. Trapping the diminutive terror inside a glass jar brought immediate calm to his mind, allowing her to offer a bright, soothing smile as he looked up with heartfelt gratitude. Awaking from the trance back in the physical room, Lloyd pushed the magical glasses onto his forehead while she lay resting peacefully beside him, her rescue mission complete. Sitting up on the bed, he quickly recovered his focus and instructed the group to follow him toward a hidden teleportation circle in the atelier. As they journeyed toward the Grand Spire, she checked on his condition, prompting him to share that the mental grip of Ruby's voice had finally cleared, making him confident enough to request her help with the magic circle. Upon knocking on the entrance to request Ruby's assistance, an armored guard abruptly stepped out to block them, warning that the property was strictly off-limits to the public. Stepping forward to inquire about the disruption, Isolde was met with the guard's startling announcement that the homeowner was under investigation for attempted murder, leaving her and the rest of the party in utter disbelief. She watched quietly as Lloyd decided against leaving immediately, opting instead to utilize the magic circle installed right inside the chamber. He explained to the group that activating this specific formation would allow them to teleport directly to his gathering spot in Roland. Sophilia voiced her hesitation, questioning whether he truly possessed a strategy or if he was acting recklessly, particularly if they encountered the prince upon arrival, though he assured her he would reveal the details once they made the jump. Stepping forward, Nero handed over a sack of essential supplies and snacks, insisting that proper provisions were vital for the journey ahead, which Lloyd accepted with quiet gratitude. When asked if she intended to join them, Isolde confirmed her participation without hesitation, explaining that she had already instructed her subordinates and could not stand by while Minerva faced such dire peril. Noticing Sophilia preparing to accompany them as well, the remaining companions expressed their regret at staying behind, wishing to help yet fearing they would only drag the team down. Teruru admitted that previously she would have tried to halt such a perilous endeavor, but now could only bow her head and earnestly plead for their safe return. With their resolve solidified, the traveling party stood united before the teleportation array, ready to step into the unknown. As the arcana roared to life, the officiating mage instructed everyone to form an orderly line, taking care to transport them individually to prevent their physical forms from overlapping during transit. Swept up in the surging vortex of space-altering magic, Lloyd set his sights on their destination, his thoughts turning sharply toward Prince Geese as the journey began. While he was still in the midst of teleporting, Black Crow reassured her companion that they were nearly at their destination, though her impatient travel partner questioned why Prince Geese had not personally come to greet them as promised. Noticing figures approaching through the chill air, the young alchemist waved cheerfully to what she assumed were friendly local soldiers, completely oblivious until the guard pointed forcefully and declared that he had located the notorious assassin. In an instant, both women found themselves clamped into heavy iron handcuffs, leaving the bewildered alchemist crying out in confusion, only to be harshly silenced by an armored guard commanding them not to speak. Her confusion spiraled into pure terror when the guards bluntly announced their imminent execution, revealing to her horror that her companion was already a wanted criminal marked for death in this foreign land. A full week had passed since their capture, and now they had finally arrived at the grand capital. Reflecting on their journey, Alchemia realized the grave situation they were in as captives. Beside her, Black Crow engaged in a bizarre theatrical reenactment using makeshift paper masks, dramatizing her failed assassination attempt and claiming to have brought back someone of immense value. Watching this absurd display before the castle guards, she began to deeply regret following her companion into such a bizarre situation. Beyond the entrance, deep within the audience room of Roland Castle, formal reports were being delivered regarding the smooth progress of the military offensive on the Melzaria front. Seated high upon the throne was Prince Geese of Roland, who expressed his desire to settle the current crisis as swiftly as possible alongside Saint Ezekiel. He proclaimed that unifying the continent was the unfulfilled dream of his late father, the former king assassinated by demons, and vowed that he alone was worthy to claim the throne and carry out that legacy. Supporting his ambitious vision, Saint Ezekiel warmly offered her full assistance toward Gisa's grand undertaking. In stark contrast to the noble atmosphere, the masked assassin leaned in to whisper to her companion that she was so nervous she might lose control of her bladder, earning a sharp rebuke to shut up. Unaware of their quiet exchange, the prince commended Ezekiel for her understanding nature, while casting a bitter glance toward Iris. He vented his frustration over how much Iris had made him suffer by flexing her saintly authority, recalling her endless demands, such as preventing wars, lowering farmer taxes, and even hiring the best cook in the city. He watched impassively as Saint Ezekiel stepped forward to comfort the tearful Alchemia, assuring the girl that the past was behind them. Interrupting the moment, a royal guard knelt before the prince to deliver his report, explaining that while the assassination attempt on Saintess Iris had failed, capturing Black Crow alongside the alchemist would still prove useful. Dismissing any plea for mercy, the cold prince silenced the saint, harshly declaring that he had no tolerance for incompetence and possessed no use for the young captives. Without hesitation, he pronounced his ultimate decree, condemning both chained captives to immediate execution. As guards seized the prisoners to drag them away, Alchemia struggled violently against her chains, shouting her credentials and regretting her arrival, while Saint Ezekiel softly pleaded for the soldiers to hold. Turning to the prince with a serene smile, the saint requested an end to the needless bloodshed, asking if she could instead be granted custody of the two girls. Hearing the divine intercession, the young alchemist looked up in utter disbelief, sweat trickling down her cheek as she realized her life might be spared. Relenting to the request, the guards escorted the two bound captives down the castle's vaulted hall, leading them away from immediate death. Walking in the heavy irons, the young alchemist quietly remarked on their narrow escape from death, prompting their armed guard to remind them how fortunate they were to experience the saint's compassion. Upon reaching their new quarters, they encountered a gathering of bizarre and colorful figures who called out to them, leaving the young alchemist bewildered by the castle's strange secret residence. She stood frozen as the odd assembly of prisoners revealed their backgrounds. One confessed to skinning and murdering a young woman, another was a jester who had insulted the prince, and the third was a bishop loyal to Saint Iris. Murmurs spread among the captives regarding Saint Ezekiel, explaining how she was welcomed by Roland after her original homeland fell to demons, leaving them to wonder what cruel duties she intended to force upon them. Before anyone could speculate further, the heavy stone doors groaned open, and Saint Ezekiel stepped into the chamber to address the gathered outcasts. Accompanying her was a monstrous, bird-like beast of immense scale, striking sheer horror into Alchemia's heart at the mere sight of it. Dismissing their dread with a calm smile, the saint casually referred to the creature as her pet before ordering documents to be distributed to every prisoner. Looking down at the parchment handed to her, Alchemia realized it contained a list of alchemy gathering materials, while Ezekiel declared her demand for their labor. Upon examining the details of the list, she realized with growing dread that the task presented was utterly impossible. One of the captives burst out in protest, shouting that the listed items could only be found in deadly unexplored zones and that she was ordering them to their deaths. In a terrifying display of power, an overwhelming gravity burst forth from Ezekiel, slamming the protesting captive violently onto the stone floor. Smiling with sinister malice, the saint made it brutally clear that her demand was not an order open to refusal, it was their absolute fate. She loomed over the captives with terrifying malice, making it abundantly clear that their lives were entirely in her hands and demanding absolute, unquestioning submission to her every whim. Driven by her relentless shouting, the terrified group was forced to march immediately, without a moment to rest or process their dread. As they trudged into the freezing, snow-covered mountains with heavy packs on their backs, her parting threat echoed behind them, warning that returning without every required item meant instant execution. Pausing at an ominous wooden sign marked with a skull, the travelers realized they were stepping beyond the reach of divine protection and entering dangerous, uncharted territory. Moving deeper into the snow, the prisoners quietly discussed the terrifying reality of their situation, reflecting on how the saint had cleverly hidden her ruthless nature to seize power. Knowing that defying her meant guaranteed death, they accepted that survival depended entirely on completing the perilous mission assigned to them. Realizing their strength lay in unity, the group agreed that mutual cooperation was their only hope of braving the wilderness alive. Before they could settle into a rhythm, a monstrous three-headed hound burst from the snow, ambushing the group with snarling fangs and terrifying ferocity. In a frenzy of panic, the group scrambled for cover toward what looked like a nearby cavern, only to discover in horror that the dark opening was actually a deadly creature waiting in ambush. Desperate for a way out, the alchemist pleaded for help, prompting her companion to instantly deploy a swarm of decoy clones to confuse their attackers. Her clones were supposed to buy them precious time, but the gluttonous beast devoured every single shadow copy without hesitation. Alchemia could only watch in utter horror as her allies' desperate decoy strategy failed, with the ravenous creature showing no signs of slowing down or choking. Driven into a corner as the monster lunged forward, Alchemia lost her balance in the deep snow, her leg collapsing beneath her as panic took hold. Looming directly over her, the beast curled its lips into a menacing snarl, locking its cruel, predatory eyes on the helpless young alchemist. Its massive jaws opened wide, revealing a cavernous gullet lined with razor-sharp teeth ready to snap shut around her. Trapped within the shadow of those deadly jaws, tears welled in Alchemia's eyes as intense terror paralyzed her entire body. With death imminent, her mind flashed back to memories of how harsh others had been toward Lloyd, even as she faced the terrifying question of whether her own life was about to end. She remembered Lloyd's gentle apology for causing trouble, his quiet humility standing in stark contrast to her current utter helplessness. Overwhelmed by regret, fear, and a desperate desire to survive, a choked cry tore from her throat. The encouraging words of Master Crowley resonated in her mind, reminding her of his firm belief that she possessed the potential to one day stand as an alchemist equal to Lloyd. Yet all thoughts and memories were abruptly swallowed as a pitch-black void descended, plunging her senses into total darkness. She screamed with wild determination, refusing to give up even while trapped within the beast's gaping mouth. Motivated by her desire to gather rare materials just as Lloyd would, she summoned every ounce of courage to complete her task. With a final tremor, the massive monster collapsed into the snow. Roland acknowledged her success, confirming that she had managed to extract the Chihuahua Bear's fong, one of the crucial materials required for their objectives. Completely drained and covered in grime, she collapsed face up into the freezing snow with a weary laugh. Her immediate desire was a hot, relaxing bath, though Roland dryly pointed out that such a luxury was impossible for the foreseeable future. Meanwhile, across the border, Lloyd completed his high-level teleportation spell inside a secluded wooden cabin. His companions gathered around the glowing magic circle, relieved that their covert crossing had been executed without incident. As Sephilia pressed him for details regarding his plan to deal with the prince, he summoned a small magic chest with a quiet pop, presenting it as his primary tool. He casually announced his intention to place the prince inside the dimensional spatial box and carry him back, leaving his allies stunned by the sheer audacity of the scheme. Sephilia openly questioned the madness of the proposal and whether a human could even survive inside such a container. He assured her that the interior functioned like a spacious tent, making it surprisingly comfortable and safe. Pondering the unconventional idea, Iris began to see the tactical advantage hidden within its absurdity. Because it was so absurd, no enemy force would ever anticipate such a move. The group discussed how spatial item boxes represented master-grade magic that only an elite few could master. The absolute rarity of the technique guaranteed that the Imperial Guards would never suspect an abduction was occurring via dimensional storage. With a confident smile, he finalized the objective. They would transport the prince to Melzeria for peace negotiations, capitalizing on rare negotiation materials that only he was capable of securing. He listened attentively as the former Holy Knight stepped forward to take charge, pointing out that she and the Saintess were originally from these lands and knew the region best. With their plan set, she raised her arm in high spirits, enthusiastically declaring how much she was looking forward to working alongside everyone as they prepared to traverse the freezing terrain. As the party began their trek across the exposed cliffside, a strange creature with glowing eyes lurked in the shadows, silently tracking their movement along the snow-covered ridge. Far from the mountain pass, Saint Ezekiel stood within her sanctuary, her expression twisting into a cruel smile as she ominously noted that unwanted insects had somehow managed to crawl in. The strange, feathery creature lay motionless in the snow, revealed to be an artificial magical construct. He explained to the group that the beast was merely a puppet steered from afar, though one of his companions could only ponder whether its meat was edible. Gazing through the falling snow, she acknowledged her long-awaited return to the cathedral where the prince was being held. Deep within the grand fortress, urgent news reached the demon as guards reported the destruction of her familiar and the sudden return of her enemy. Her eyes burned with cold rage at the realization that mere pests had dared to destroy her creation. Unwilling to let the persistent young woman interfere any longer, she commanded her forces to wipe out the intruders without leaving a single survivor. Meanwhile, outside the heavily guarded gates, the prince noted the formidable defenses, prompting the young mage to casually summon a massive explosive spell to clear the way. His companions immediately shrieked in sheer panic, desperately trying to stop him before he leveled the entire surrounding area. She berated him fiercely, asking if he had completely lost his mind, and reminding him that ordinary humans could not survive his absurd power. She reprimanded him fiercely, shouting that his destructive spells would instantly vaporize a normal human, and even with physical reinforcement, a direct hit to a vital organ would prove fatal. Grabbing him by the face, she demanded he stop using magic on living targets if he couldn't control his output, while he meekly suggested plant magic instead, only to be reminded that giant vines would instantly blow their cover. Observing the chaotic exchange, the prince noted that growing up in unexplored wilderness had left the young mage completely devoid of common sense, leaving him to sulk dejectedly on the ground. Pivoting back to their primary objective, the blonde knight declared that their mission was quiet infiltration rather than waging an open war, urging everyone to maintain absolute stealth. While the others discussed tactics, their smaller companion was already off to the side, quietly helping herself to food she had discovered along the cliffside ledge. Catching her mid-bite, the knight seized the girl in a fit of exasperation, demanding to know where on earth she had managed to procure a meal during a covert operation. The girl pointed toward the stone walls, explaining that they were standing directly outside the fortress's disposal area, a massive food dump containing abundant discarded rations. Realizing that this obscure disposal chute provided an unguarded back door into the cathedral, the group quickly gathered to revise their entry strategy. Meanwhile, inside the complex, two cathedral guards chatted casually, confident that such a remote utility section required minimal patrol presence. Walking beneath the soaring stone arches, the guards patrolled their quiet corridor, entirely unaware that the infiltrators were already closing in on their position. As the group attempted to blend in, an armed guard hailed them out of nowhere, whispering in hushed, anxious tones beneath their heavy helmets. The party urged Lloyd to find a subtle spell to slip past without raising suspicion. He pressed harder, demanding to know where they were heading and why they were away from their assigned posts. Lloyd panicked inwardly, realizing their flimsy cover was hanging by a thread. Before suspicion could turn into action, Safiria stepped forward with absolute confidence, claiming they were specialized troops responding to a reported disturbance in the library. Her sharp authority instantly convinced the guard, who bowed in deference to her reputation. Eager to assist a former holy knight, the guards offered to lead the way themselves, enthusiastically pointing toward the corridor leading to the library. As they marched along together, the guard casually brought up rumors of the invading force, mockingly mentioning Lloyd and his notoriously pathetic drop rate. Suppressing his urge to correct the numbers, Lloyd kept quiet and searched for an opportunity to break away. He went on to describe the dangerous renegades in the enemy ranks, warning of Isolde's brute force and Safiria's ruthless berserker nature. Repeating further rumors, he claimed these traitors were responsible for driving the former saint to madness, shaking his head at their supposed wickedness. Before he could utter another word, a sharp cascade of ice spear magic struck from behind, freezing and knocking out the patrol in a sudden burst of frost. With the escort incapacitated, the group left the unconscious guards behind and pushed forward into the cathedral's depths. Farther inside the complex, news of the disturbance reached an officer who coldly dismissed the defeated guards as useless upon learning a sentry was felled near the grand corridor. She smirked with cruel confidence as glowing, beastly creatures materialized around her, confident that the intruders were heading straight into a dead end within the monster-infested prison. With a sharp command, she unleashed the pack of ravenous monsters into the subterranean halls, ordering them to hunt down the invaders and avenge their fallen kin. As the roaring beast horde came bounding down the passageway, Prince Geese stepped forward without hesitation, weapon raised, declaring he would handle the oncoming swarm himself. Bypassing the front lines, the rest of the party reached the inner cell blocks, where captive guild members instantly recognized Isolde behind her armor and called out in desperate relief. Through the heavy iron bars, the trapped mercenaries explained how enemy forces had been abducting foreign merchants and citizens, using them as expendable bait in deadly monster zones. Determined to save every captive, Prince Geese materialized a massive enchanted sanctuary chest, leaving Isolde dumbfounded as he urged the bewildered prisoners to step inside. Working rapidly, the group ushered the crowd into the fortified spatial door, with the deeply grateful captives offering prayers of thanks to the saint and her allies as they found safety. Breaching a reinforced door deeper within the dungeon, they stumbled into a shadowy chamber and froze upon discovering a young child suspended from a wooden post, bound tightly in chains. Gathering around the battered, unconscious girl, they recognized her immense latent magical power and realized she was a foreign mage who had been subjected to unspeakable torture. Overcome by shock and remorse, Isolde stared at the child's broken form, her eyes welling with tears of rage as she cursed herself for allowing such cruelty to happen. She looked on with deep distress, acknowledging that regardless of the prince's hidden motives, allowing his reign of cruelty to continue would bring untold suffering to countless more innocent lives. Her warning was cut short as sudden shouts echoed down the hallway, where enemy guards spotted the escaping group and raised the alarm. Within moments, hostile troops hemmed them in from all sides in the vast stone corridor, completely cutting off their easy escape. Refusing to let the mission fail, their allies unleashed a powerful tempest of wind magic to draw the guards' fury away, shouting for the pair to press forward toward the cathedral. With the path briefly cleared, she turned toward her companion with absolute resolve, suggesting they show the arrogant prince the astonishing power of her plant magic. He met her gaze with a broad, confident smirk, eagerly agreeing to join her in turning the tide of battle. High above the subterranean conflicts, the grand cathedral stood tall against the falling snow, a massive monument harboring the true heart of the enemy's power. Inside the inner sanctum, blood dripped onto the cold stone floor where the defeated demonic warrior slumped in physical collapse. She offered a rasping apology to her lord for failing to hold the line, leaving him to realize that the intruders had overcome her formidable defenses. Yet he remained completely unbothered, smiling arrogantly as he gestured to the formidable army of Holy Flame Knights lined up behind him to crush the incoming threat. He stood confident behind his defensive line, boasting that the wide bridge exposed any attacker to ranged fire and declaring that not even a mouse could slip past his formation. But his confidence vanished instantly as massive, writhing tendrils erupted from the ground, tearing through the defenses and leaving the prince and his guards reeling in utter confusion. Towering high into the sky, the grand cathedral itself was engulfed and hoisted by the gargantuan vines, throwing the entire defensive stronghold into chaos. With the army neutralized, Iris and Lloyd stepped forward unchallenged, declaring that no one remained to aid him as Iris demanded the prince surrender and accompany them. Staring back in utter disbelief, the prince spat out her name, questioning her motives and accusing their cause of being nothing more than self-righteous arrogance. Iris dismissed his claim as a mere pretense, but he vehemently countered, arguing that her actions were disrupting human authority and handing victory to the demons. She pointed out that he was simply afraid of losing control, reinforcing that her true duty as a saint was to protect the innocent. An ideal Lloyd quietly stood by her to support. Seething at her unyielding defiance, the prince cursed her stubbornness, prompting Iris to declare that if he truly wished to rule the kingdom, he would have to defeat them first as magic surged between them. Accepting her challenge without hesitation, Iris raised her arm, her eyes gleaming with absolute resolve as she vowed to cut down his ambition once and for all. Beside her, Lloyd poised his staff for battle, stepping forward into the vanguard as the former allies prepared to clash for the fate of the... Within the vast, crumbling hall of the cathedral, the opposing sides stood locked in a tense standoff amidst dust and falling debris. Assessing the standoff, the young mage realized that his primary objective was straightforward: capture the prince standing across the room. Meanwhile, Prince Geese shouted across the hall toward Iris, angrily demanding to know why she was accompanying such a dangerous spellcaster. Glancing at her demonic adversary, the young saint noticed with growing unease that her antagonist was clad in attire identical to her own. Smirking maliciously, Ezekiel taunted her, declaring that she had merely returned to meet her inevitable demise. Turning her sharp gaze toward the young mage, the demon acknowledged his impressive performance, but coldly decided that anyone who stood out so prominently needed to be eliminated immediately. Raising her weapon, she unleashed Delta Stream, sending a roaring tempest of spiraling wind dragons tearing violently across the chamber. Bracing himself against the sudden gale, he raised his magical staff as the young woman behind him recognized the catastrophic power of the incoming wind magic. Reacting in a split second, he shielded them with a force shield spell, absorbing the crushing impact while onlookers screamed in terror as the surrounding structure buckled under the kinetic assault. As a direct result of the devastating clash, massive vines binding the cathedral began to snap, causing the entire building to tilt precariously to one side. Beneath falling stone blocks and shattering columns, frantic cries filled the air as the cathedral began to cave in around them. As the dust settles over the collapsing structure, Prince Geese cackles triumphantly, boasting that no one could possibly survive the overwhelming strength of Ezekiel's wind magic. Even the demon woman herself pauses, genuinely impressed by the destructive surge of power that has just leveled their surroundings. Yet, as the haze clears, she is stunned to find Lloyd standing completely unharmed in front of Iris, instantly retaliating with a roaring cyclone magic of his own. Driven by wild excitement rather than fear, she activates her physical enhancement ability and leaps headlong into the gusting vortex with a manic battle cry. Observing the attacker's advance, Iris steps forward to engage her directly, leaving Geese staring in wide-eyed disbelief at the sudden shift in momentum. An intense duel erupts between the two women as Ezekiel hurls fireballs while Iris counters with precise ice spears and water bullets, declaring her intent to subdue her foe without taking her life. Reaching the climax of her spellcasting, she summons a colossal water dragon that surges through the air with a deafening roar, terrifying Geese as it sweeps over the chamber. Breathing heavily from the immense strain of the spell, she admits her energy is nearly spent, while Geese, crawling in shock, demands to know where she acquired such formidable magic, to which she simply credits Lloyd's guidance. This acknowledgement triggers a wave of bitter anger in the prince, who screams that she always listens to Lloyd while completely disregarding everything he ever said to her. Standing alone before her in the vast, grand hall, he solemnly presses her, asking if she is truly prepared to devote her very soul to her divine duty. He recalled the loftiness of her vows, her pledge to protect the weak, bring justice, and cleanse the land of deception, believing then that such a maiden was the only suitable partner to rule beside him in the theocratic nation. Her ascension from the Saint Training School had marked her as a prodigy, cementing his conviction that destiny had arranged their match. Yet when they first arrived at the grand estate, greeted by the attendant Tururu who offered to manage her daily needs, the reality of her nature began to reveal itself. Instead of displaying the solemn dignity expected of a divine figure, her eyes lit up like an excited child's at the sheer scale and beauty of the palace around her. Her immediate concern had not been holy duties, but whether they had retained a royal cook, leaving him to wonder in disbelief if this simple girl was truly the nation's revered saint. Snapping back to the present, he unleashed his pent-up fury, shouting that she was nothing more than a clueless brat who only cared about home-cooked meals and harbored foolishly naive notions about the world. He raged over how, despite her absolute ignorance, everyone around her had continuously lavished her with praise while everything around them crumbled. Amidst his bitter rant, the sudden chaos of combat interrupted him as Lloyd looked on in surprise, piecing together the true motives behind their allies' involvement. Driven to utter exasperation, he bellowed that her ignorance knew no bounds, only for her to sharply cut him off, declaring that his bitter past no longer mattered. She remembered the sacrifices made during their arduous journeys to frontier temples, the knights who pledged their lives to escort her, refusing to let his resentment overshadow the duty and gratitude she carried in her heart. She stood firm as Prince Geese lashed out, accusing her of lacking self-awareness. The prince argued that with demons invading and his own father slain, uniting all territories into a singular, powerful nation under his command was the only way to safeguard humanity. Responding with unwavering clarity, the young saint warned that starting an internal conflict would only fracture their forces, leaving them no better than the monsters they fought. She openly questioned whether his true motive was simply to annex neighboring nations under the guise of unity. Infuriated by her challenge, Geese roared in anger, demanding to know what a naive girl could possibly understand about the burdens of royal leadership. Unleashing a sudden surge of magical force, he knocked her off her feet, mocking her elevated status. Seeing her collapse onto the stone floor beneath the standing prince, Lloyd cried out her name in terror as he and his allies watched from afar. High above on the ledge, Geese panted heavily, his expression torn between righteous fury and bitter hesitation as he grudgingly acknowledged the truth in her argument. Despite the blow, the maiden rose with eyes burning with fierce determination, declaring that even as a simple girl from the countryside, she could not turn a blind eye to his destructive ambition. Lloyd rushed forward to confront the prince for resorting to violence, but Iris broke down in tears, accepting responsibility for having driven Geese to this point of madness. Resolved to stop him before he caused further harm, she summoned her elemental magic and released a massive water dragon spell aimed straight at Geese. Trapped inside the swirling sphere of torrential water, Geese thrashed helplessly, leaving Lloyd and Isolde watching in utter shock. Taking action immediately, Lloyd activated super physical enhancement, leaping across the broken stone pillars to reach the drowning prince. He triumphantly held up the newly retrieved chest, exclaiming in excitement at his success, while the saint looked on with a warm smile. Pausing in the vast, ancient hall, he stammered nervously while she addressed him with quiet respect. She gently inquired if he was unhurt, to which he admitted with a sheepish rub of his head that the ordeal had taken him off guard. A comfortable silence fell between them in the towering sanctuary. Overcome by sudden embarrassment, she buried her face in her hands, profusely apologizing for revealing such a vulnerable state in front of him. Responding with tender kindness, he placed his gloved hand gently upon her head, soothing her rising distress. With a self-deprecating smile, he reassured her that he was constantly making mistakes himself, so she had no reason to feel ashamed. Her eyes welled with emotional tears as relief washed over her, realizing that even someone as capable as him was beautifully imperfect. Meanwhile, across a freezing alpine trail, two weary gatherers celebrated completing their heavy harvest of raw materials while the peaceful atmosphere in the sanctuary remained unbroken. Suddenly, a sharp vibration rattled the snowy earth, filling one of the gatherers with a chilling foreboding regarding the true nature of their cargo. Before the terrified gatherers, a colossal, scaled behemoth erupts into view, accompanied by another winged, draconic monster atop its back. Stunned by its monumental size, the gatherers cry out in utter panic, frantically questioning how they could possibly hope to defeat or even survive such a nightmare. As the two titanic beasts begin their ominous march across the desolate snowscape, a chilling realization strikes. They appear to be heading straight toward the city of Roland. Haunted by lingering voices echoing in her mind, a defeated warrior struggled against harsh taunts mocking her weakness and past failures. She questioned the identity of the mysterious girl who suddenly surfaced in her memories. Struggling to stand against a cold stone wall, she groaned in pain while nursing her wounds. She was forced to admit that she had severely underestimated Lloyd and could not hope to defeat him in her current state. Nearby, he casually hoisted a heavy wooden barrel containing Prince Geese, explaining nonchalantly that their dimensional item box had burst from being overfilled, leaving Iris exasperated by his sheer absurdity. As chaotic magical blasts erupted around them, she watched the battle unfold while calling upon backup monsters, realizing her urgent need to escape the area. While she tenderly cradled the injured young girl in her arms, her companion noted with deep concern that even innocent bystanders had been caught in the crossfire. Suddenly, a shadow fell from above as she descended aggressively, landing with a loud crash right before them and demanding they hand over the child. Glaring fiercely through her disheveled hair, she made it clear that Prince Geese was no longer of any use to her, but insisted that the girl be surrendered immediately on pain of death. Surprised that her true objective was the young girl rather than the royal captive, he firmly refused her demands, declaring they would never hand over an innocent child. Gritting her teeth in mounting desperation, she reached up to grip her forehead, agonizing over her failed mission and expressing deep reluctance to unleash her forbidden power. With a dramatic surge of dark, corruptive magic, she cast off her disguise as massive demon horns sprouted from her head, revealing her true, terrifying demonic form to the shocked party. She stood transformed, fully embracing her demonic nature as she cast aside all pretenses, her terrifying presence dominating the courtyard. Her revelation sent shockwaves through the group. Prince Geese struggled to accept that the saintess he idolized was a demon, while Lloyd and Iris openly confronted her true identity. Before they could recover, she launched herself into the sky and came crashing down, forcing him to yell for everyone to fall back as debris erupted around them. Gathering destructive energy in her claws, she declared her intention to eliminate them all, while he raised his staff to channel a counterspell. A massive magic array materialized between them, detonating in a catastrophic explosion that illuminated the night sky. The violent blast reverberated across the entire cathedral, blowing away stone and earth while the companions shielded themselves from the fallout. Assessing the situation through the smoke, he quietly analyzed her power, while Iris gasped in disbelief at the realization that the demon's mana matched his own colossal strength. Sensing their astonishment, she swooped down with ferocious speed, grinning madly at the prospect of fighting a worthy adversary. Their high-speed duel ignited instantly, her relentless claws clashing fiercely against his staff as he parried every lightning-fast blow. The frantic engagement tore through the cathedral grounds, leaving trail lines of raw magic and shattered stone in their wake as Iris watched the overwhelming spectacle in total awe. He stood facing his demon opponent, acutely aware that the forces at play were on an entirely different level. Surprised by his unexpected resilience, she demanded to know what rigorous training had forged his strength, only for him to casually reply that he was merely gathering raw crafting materials. As he explained that his search led him into deadly, uncharted lands such as the distant white sand dunes, she could only stare in utter disbelief at his casual demeanor. Still stunned by his explanation, she asked if he could possibly be serious about venturing into such lethal realms for mere gathering trips. Her expression shifted dramatically to emotional shock as she revealed that she, too, had trained in those very same harsh lands, amazed to find another soul who had braved them and survived. Memories resurfaced of her past as the primary subordinate of the Demon Lord, recalling the cruel philosophy drilled into her, that overwhelming, brutal strength was the only way to crush human courage. Her ruler had deemed her far too weak, casting her out without mercy and sentencing her to 1,000 grueling years of solitary training in those perilous white sand dunes. Though she had wept and pleaded that not even the bravest veteran warriors could endure more than a few days in such a hellish environment, her ruler had coldly declared her exile to be an inescapable fate. Day after Scorching Day, she had fought monstrous abominations and scraped by on the edge of death, a brutal ordeal that resonated deeply with the young swordsman standing before her. Forced to consume monster flesh to survive a millennium of torment, her reverence for the Demon Lord had curdled into deep hatred, leaving her empty of allegiance even when finally offered a place on the front lines. She reveals the hidden history of the Demon Lord, explaining how she waited until her former master was severely weakened from her battle against the hero before striking her from behind, sedating her, and taking her captive. Contrary to human records claiming the demon lord suffered a mortal wound, she asserts that the entity being guarded is none other than the shadow of the demon lord herself. Her shocking disclosure leaves Lloyd and Iris standing in stunned silence as the gravity of her confession settles over them. Continuing her tale, she describes how she hid among the humans while waiting for her moment, going so far as to control monsters, deceive the prince, and impersonate Roland Saintus, only for her carefully laid schemes to be disrupted when Iris began manifesting genuine holy power. Iris counters her explanation, questioning why she felt compelled to embrace the role of destroying humanity when that responsibility belonged solely to the demon lord. With eyes wide and a fierce, feral snarl, she shouts that her ultimate goal is to surpass the demon lord entirely, declaring that this grand deception is her ultimate act of vengeance against her former ruler. Her gaze narrows into a sharp, bitter glare as she emphasizes that her victory will not come from brute force, but by layering scheme upon scheme to orchestrate events from the dark, utterly denying the demon lord's very existence. Lloyd dryly acknowledges the sheer scale of her ambition, yet he points out the collateral damage, listing how she manipulated the prince, ruined countless lives across Roland and Minerva, and put innocent townspeople in harm's way just to settle a personal score. His expression hardens into an uncompromising stare as he draws the line, stating plainly that exploiting Ruby as a resource for her schemes is something he will never tolerate. She drops her aggressive stance, letting out a faint sigh of disappointment as she admits she had harbored a small hope that he, of all people, might understand her motivations. Turning her gaze toward the distant horizon, she quietly concedes that her master plan has ended in absolute failure, acknowledging that Lloyd was the uncalculated variable who dismantled her ambitions. She admitted with a grim expression that she had hoped to avoid resorting to violence, but now felt compelled to settle the matter through sheer force. Standing alongside her towering reptilian beast while Lloyd watched closely, she defiantly declared that her grand ambitions would simply be realized in the next kingdom. However, before she could make her retreat, Iris stepped resolutely into her path with her rapier drawn, refusing to allow the demon woman to slip away so easily. Upon arriving at the Roland territory, the travelers gasped in shock to find the entire region completely overrun by titanic, draconian beasts. Gazing upon the monstrous horde, the young woman panicked, realizing that negotiating their way home through such terrifying creatures was impossible, even with immortality on their side. Suddenly, a menacing, owl-like shadow loomed right behind her and uttered a piercing screech, causing her to shriek in horror and recoil. She desperately pleaded with the feathered beast to use its clone magic to clear a path, but the creature flatly refused, warning that even its kin would be swiftly wiped out. Accepting the hopelessness of their situation, they reluctantly decided to abandon their journey for now and return the materials they had managed to gather. Elsewhere on the battlefield, Lloyd boldly positioned himself in front of the saint, staring down the colossal demonic dragon while declaring that he would not permit the enemy to advance another step. He stood shoulder to shoulder with Iris, his expression resolute as he vowed directly to the demon lord that he would never surrender the saint into evil hands. Hearing his bold defiance, she smirked malevolently and ordered her commanders to focus all their destructive magic on the young swordsman, knowing his defeat would crumble their defense. She boasted of her infinite regeneration as long as her dark title endured, unleashing a devastating blast of magic that forced the defenders to erect massive protective barriers against the cataclysmic explosion. She watched with amusement as the grand cathedral loomed ahead, where Iris called out in sudden alarm at the approaching menace. Continuing her mockery, the Demon Queen noted how easily Lloyd's shield had shattered, attributing his failure to a lack of experience in the harsh sand dunes. Standing beside her colossal beast beneath a glowing magical crest, she prepared to unleash an overwhelming force. Defying her expectations, Lloyd manifested an immense barrier capable of defending the entire cathedral against a barrage of 16 heavy explosions. Warning him of a sudden rear attack, Iris shouted out as demonic beasts lunged forward, forcing Lloyd to cast protective barriers while Ezekiel smirked at the chaos. As the creatures closed in, Iris intervened directly, conjuring a sharp spear of ice to obliterate the target and making sure he remained unharmed. Seizing upon the distraction, Ezekiel continued to mock their efforts, declaring his companions far too weak to survive the oncoming onslaught. Taunting him about his traumatic past in the sand dunes, she watched with glee as Lloyd fearlessly vaulted into the air to engage the massive beasts head-on. Undeterred by her taunts, the young swordsman stood firm on the ruined ground, facing down 3 hideous, gaping abominations alone. Distance away, Isolde observed the catastrophic magic detonation rising above the city, stunned by the sheer magnitude of the foe Lloyd was up against. She stood alert among the fallen, hearing the terrified shouts of the cathedral guards begging for salvation as chaos erupted around them. Giant owl-like beasts descended upon the courtyard, Ezekiel's demonic familiars swooping down to unleash destruction upon the panic-stricken knights. A massive monster towered over the rubble, but Isolde leaped forward without hesitation, channeling her sword technique, Flashblade, to cleave directly into the beast. Though her strike landed true, the creature's dense magical defense deflected the brunt of the impact, sending her staggering back from the force of her own recoil. Refusing to break, she rallied her ally Syphilia, calling for them to execute their combined double-fong sword technique, a maneuver forged through their secret joint training. But just as they prepared to charge, Syphilia inexplicably bit down on Isolde, leaving the knight leader completely stunned and baffled mid-battle. While the massive beast bellowed in the distance above the burning cathedral, Isolde shouted in frustration, demanding to know why Syphilia always acted so bizarrely instead of following their practice. Syphilia defended herself by claiming that Isolde smelled enticingly of sweet candy, distracting her, though Isolde countered that she had not baked a single treat in weeks. Exasperated, Isolde relented and promised that if they survived this fight and cleared the field, she would bake Syphilia a massive cake. Hearing the promise of dessert, Syphilia's eyes gleamed with sudden, unshakable motivation, literally shimmering with images of cake. She unleashed a devastating synchronized attack alongside Isolde, combining their blades in the double-fong sword technique Baikiage combo to strike down their demonic foes. Their ferocious joint assault shattered the enemy's massive defense, forcing Ezekiel to realize these holy knights were far more dangerous than simple brutes as Isolde rallied the surrounding troops. Stunned by the sudden loss of her beast, the demon commander wiped sweat from her forehead, struggling to accept that mere humans possessed such formidable power. Far from her sight, Lloyd observed the distant clash, instantly recognizing Isolde and Syphilia spearheading the defense. As he watched, another warrior found herself cornered by a vicious beast, realizing with rising panic that she lacked the magic power needed to summon a protective water dragon. Before the creature could strike, a bizarre figure wearing a giant paper bag over its head rushed onto the field, boldly declaring that help had arrived. They were not alone, as an entire line of similarly disguised allies stepped up to shield Lloyd and the others from the oncoming monsters. Their heroic stance was short-lived, however, as one of their paper coverings suddenly burst into flames, sending the wearer running in frantic circles to extinguish the blaze. Stripping away the burnt mask, Lyra and Mars emerged coughing from the smoke, furiously explaining to a shocked Lloyd that they had stowed away inside his item box. They recounted how during the recent chaotic battle, they barely had time to climb into his storage chest before escaping the endless waves of enemies. He watched in astonishment as members of the Adventurers Guild suddenly burst out from his item box, eager to join the fray and defend Lady Iris with their newly acquired abilities. Watching the reinforcements emerge, Iris recognized them as allies, while Ezekiel scoffed at their arrival, dismissing them as insignificant small fry. Unfazed by the demon's arrogance, an A-class adventurer shouted back, declaring that they were not to be taken lightly. Capitalizing on the sudden distraction, Isolde and Syphilia launched a coordinated strike, unleashing their double-fong sword technique upon the enemy ranks. The sheer power of their combined attack forced Ezekiel to grimly acknowledge that Lloyd was far from the only formidable opponent present. Seizing the initiative, Lloyd called upon the entire group to mount a simultaneous attack, while he personally held Ezekiel back. As Iris, Geese, and the adventurers rallied with a roar, the demon princess panicked and demanded that her minions form a protective wall around her. A barrage of ice magic and heavy sword strikes rained down instantly, tearing through the demonic guards that attempted to shield their mistress. In a swift, decisive advance, Lloyd closed the distance and cast double silence magic, completely shutting down Ezekiel's spellcasting capabilities before she could execute a counterspell. Glaring at him with bared fangs, Ezekiel burned with rage, but Lloyd locked eyes with her and declared that he was no longer the lone survivor who wandered the desolate dunes, but a warrior fighting alongside steadfast comrades. Surrounding her from every direction, the united party lunged together in a single, massive onslaught. The concentrated power of their combined assault culminated in a blinding, focused explosion, carving a massive cross of light across the shattered terrain. As the smoke cleared, the severely injured demon princess collapsed to her knees, clutching her wounds as she surveyed her dead minions and realized she had lost all advantage. She felt a chilling sense of familiarity washing over her, realizing this dire predicament mirrored the terrifying horrors from thousands of years ago. Driven to desperation as the monstrous entity loomed overhead, she barked out a furious demand, shouting to know how much longer the onslaught would continue. Moments later, the violent commotion finally ground to a halt, leaving a battered and bruised young woman kneeling weakly beside her giant beast. Exhausted and covered in scrapes, she looked up through her messy bangs and softly gasped Lloyd's name. Hearing her faint call, he turned around in complete shock, his eyes wide as he recognized Ruby in such a desperate state. As cold sweat broke out on his brow, Ezekiel watched with a maniacal grin, savoring the bitter twist of high within the structure. Ruby turned in complete disbelief upon finding Lloyd standing before her, demanding to know what he was doing there. Furious, she pressed him further, demanding to know where he had vanished to and how he could dare abandon all of the Atelier's assigned quests, leaving him stuttering for an explanation. She continued to vent her frustration, declaring that her entire life had been thrown into utter turmoil ever since the day he walked away from the Atelier. Her mind flashed back to the ordeal of being forced to gather raw materials under ruthless demon command, where praise came only alongside agonizing labor. Witnessing her emotional outburst, the companions could only call out her name in complete shock as the full weight of her plight registered. Before anyone could react to the reunion, Ezekiel manifested a massive, glowing vessel into the air, causing Lloyd to recognize it with instant dread as an ancient alchemy cauldron. The demon villainess sinisterly detailed how she had intended to use the powerful artifact as a quick means of transportation to conquer neighboring realms. As energy violently swirled around the cauldron, the surrounding fighters realized with panic that she was actively forging a new tool by absorbing the lingering remnants of defeated monsters. Completing the synthesis, she placed the newly created crown atop her head with a triumphant smirk, activating the dimensional transfer crown. Determined to break her concentration before she could vanish, the allied warriors charged forward together, launching their double-fang sword technique in a desperate assault. She was nowhere to be found when the smoke cleared, leaving the party scanning the battlefield in utter confusion. Lloyd looked around desperately, demanding to know where the demon woman had vanished amid the rubble. Suddenly, beneath their feet, a massive, glowing magic circle flared to life across the entire stone courtyard. Noticing that every single surrounding monster had disappeared into thin air, Lloyd sensed immediate peril and barked orders to the party, urging everyone to get off the glowing pattern at once. Examining the radiant array closely, he recognized the rune structure. It was a massive teleportation circle, strikingly similar to the construct they had encountered back at the Atelier. One of the companions pointed toward the distant balcony, wondering aloud if Ezekiel had used the portal to escape to another realm. Before anyone could process the thought, a colossal surge of dark energy erupted across the horizon with a deafening rumble. Lloyd quickly corrected them, realizing this was no ordinary summoning spell. The magic array had consumed and concentrated the mana of all the vanished monsters into a single point. He went on to explain the principles of spatial convergence. When multiple teleportation magic circles are triggered simultaneously, their spatial coordinates fold onto one another, causing their targets to merge. From the swirling energy emerged a grotesque horror. Ezekiel had physically merged with the thousands of defeated beasts, transforming into a gargantuan demon leviathan that towered over the terrace. The monstrous beast sneered at Lloyd, mocking him for aligning with weak, peace-foolish humans. But Lloyd snarled back without hesitation, shouting at the creature not to insult the allies who had rescued him when he was trapped. His bold defiance only provoked a furious roar from the titanic abomination above. Ezekiel screamed for him to shut up, enraged by her own hideous transformation and declaring that she was sick of hearing his pathetic lectures. Glaring down with crimson eyes, the demon explained that wielding this monster form, the ultimate embodiment of power, was her revenge against Albatross, who had sought to force the world to bend to her absolute rule. Fixating her wrathful gaze on the young man, she accused him of completely shattering the fundamental beliefs she had lived by. Unleashing a torrent of devastating demonic energy, she demanded he take responsibility and perish, forcing him to immediately conjure a force shield to protect himself and his companions. The cataclysmic beam struck the barrier with explosive force, shockwaves radiating outward as the defense strained against the overwhelming onslaught. Watching from behind, Iris gasped in horror as spiderweb cracks fractured the glowing shield, realizing it would not hold much longer against the Titan's might. Gritting his teeth under the overwhelming strain, he struggled to maintain the barrier as the demonic pressure threatened to crush them where they stood. Turning slightly toward Iris, he offered a grim apology, admitting that Ezekiel's monstrous strength was on an entirely different level than anything they had faced before. He frankly confessed that his current magic was simply not enough to overcome her powers, while Iris listened in silent, resolute concern. Yet despite the dire odds, he stepped forward to execute a new maneuver, catching Ezekiel off guard as she gasped in sudden astonishment. He listened silently as Ezekiel derided Iris's holy power, mocking that her rigorous training as a saint amounted to nothing more than a faint breeze. Realizing a new tactical possibility, Iris pointed out that while amplifying holy magic from the distant temple of Roland might not harm Ezekiel directly, it could severely weaken the converged monsters. Though the temple stood far beyond the towering mountain range, she remained resolute in her ability to reach it with her power. Turning to his companions with focused determination, he asked them to buy him just 5 seconds so he could dispel the shield and execute a massive counterattack. Without a single hesitation, Isolde and the rest of the party agreed to his request, instantly preparing to create the necessary opening. Charging boldly through the thick smoke, Isolde launched a daring blitz attack, taking Ezekiel completely by surprise. Infuriated by the sudden interference, Ezekiel lashed out with demonic fury, bringing down giant monstrous appendages to crush the attackers. Threatening to burn his companions to ashes, the demon monster prepared to obliterate them as Iris cried out in panic. With the 5 seconds successfully bought, his allies shouted for him to unleash his spell while he quietly offered his thanks. A surge of powerful flora burst from the ground, wrapping dense, ensnaring vines tightly around the massive beast. She found herself pinned beneath the staggering weight of Roland's temple, which was hurled directly down upon her in a devastating, unexpected assault. As the massive structure struck, the nearby allies watched in absolute shock, unable to comprehend that Lloyd had actually thrown their entire holy temple at the demon beast. In the midst of the chaos, he gathered Iris into his arms and urged her to hold on tight as he cast a physical enhancement spell upon himself. With heightened speed and power, he leaped high into the air beside the plummeting structure, riding the immense force of the attack directly toward the creature. The violent impact breached the outer walls, sending shockwaves through the air as the structure ground into the earth with tremendous energy. Inside the newly repositioned temple, thick dust settled across the grand hall, revealing a massive, cavernous sanctuary still largely intact. Navigating through the dust, he carefully placed her down directly onto the sacred magic circle embedded in the floor and instructed her to begin. As she knelt in earnest prayer, he stood resolutely beside her with staff in hand, declaring that it was time to settle the score once and for all. Responding to her unwavering devotion, a brilliant wave of divine holy magic burst forth from the magic circle, illuminating the entire chamber. Caught in the radiating holy aura, the demon beast gasped in sheer agony as her dark energy began rapidly draining away. She let out a ferocious growl, her monstrous form looming ominously over the battlefield as the onlookers watched in sheer horror, shouting out for their defender. As the cavernous, fanged maw gaped wide to swallow them whole, Lloyd stood resolutely at the edge of the sacred pedestal, staff raised to protect Iris. His knuckles turned white around his staff, his eyes wide with determination as he braced himself for the impending impact. High above, the intricate holy magic circle flared with blinding light, unleashing a cataclysmic explosion directly onto the demonic threat. Caught in the devastating shockwave, the creature shattered into countless fragments, her voice trembling in utter disbelief as her power crumbled away. The force of the detonation blew away the surrounding ruins, scattering dust and debris across the quiet skyline. As the dust gradually settled, only the two of them remained standing atop the fractured precipice, unharmed amidst the silence. Exhaling a long breath, the young warrior admitted to himself just how narrowly they had escaped disaster. Before he could gather his thoughts, Iris suddenly threw her arms around him, catching him entirely off guard as she buried her face in his chest. Tears of relief welled in her eyes as she offered a tearful, radiant smile, expressing her heartfelt gratitude to him for standing by her side through the fight. She envisioned the peaceful days with her companions, remembering that her sacred duty was to protect her people. Hearing her heartfelt sentiments, he gazed down at her with a gentle, fond expression. Standing among the crumbling remnants of the holy temple, he shouted his warm response out toward the open sky. Meanwhile, amid the scorched ruins, the defeated demon dragged her broken body across the earth, stubbornly refusing to yield. Desperate to cling to life, she frantically plotted to consume the monsters of unexplored regions to regenerate her flesh and summon another teleportation circle. But before her scheming mind could take action, a dark shadow fell over her, freezing her in sheer disbelief. Standing resolutely above the crawling beast was Ruby, confronting her fallen enemy for their inevitable final encounter. Confronting the formidable demon woman, Ruby demanded that Ezekiel relinquish the magical crown and depart immediately. Ezekiel only sneered, mockingly reminding the alchemist of her past defeat and boasting of the monstrous power gained from fusing with the crown. Intrigued by the standoff, the demon considered the situation while her masked companion casually snacked nearby, asking what her next move would be. Ezekiel found the notion surprisingly entertaining. Confident in her superior position, she dismissed the threat entirely, mocking the primitive alchemy jar her companions held and pointing out that her demonic items could never be adapted or used by ordinary humans. Ignoring the demon's taunts, the young alchemist stepped forward and began pouring ingredients directly into the vessel, having carefully memorized every step of the demon's ritual during their prior clash. She carefully adjusted the mixture with the remaining reagents, fine-tuning the delicate balance of the recipe with swift, practiced precision. To Ezekiel's absolute disbelief, the clever girl boldly seized the demonic crown itself and cast it into the bubbling pot, modifying the hellish artifact for her own ends. Proudly proclaiming her status as the capital's genius alchemist, she declared her triumph for Lloyd to see, while Ezekiel frantically warned her of the catastrophic dangers of a human tampering with chaotic demonic magic. Before the warning could take hold, a blinding column of radiant light erupted from the cauldron into the sky, terrifying the onlookers with its immense power. As the dazzling blast settled into swirling clouds of dust, the young swordsman rushed through the smoke to check if his allies were unharmed. He was greeted by praise from Isolde and Sephilia, while Iris immediately began channeling restorative magic over the weary group to tend to their injuries and restore their strength. He stood uneasy as an ominous sensation washed over him, questioning the sudden shift in atmosphere. Iris urged them to search nearby for Ruby, while he resolved to investigate Ezekiel's fate, remaining mindful of the black crows spotted in the area. As they prepared to move, a colossal, shadow-shrouded entity with glowing eyes materialized amidst the dust and smoke, towering over the landscape. Panic surged through the companions at the sight of the dark silhouette. Swept with dread, They wondered if the vanquished demon Ezekiel had somehow been resurrected with such overwhelming magic. However, the monstrous creature roared with a furious demand, screeching at the top of its lungs for Lloyd to reveal himself immediately. Upon recognizing the voice, the young swordsman stared in sheer horror, his mouth agape as he realized the grotesque monster before them was actually Ruby. The party shuddered, shocked by her horrifying transformation after utilizing Ezekiel's demonic alchemy vessel. Fueled by chaotic energy, the transformed Ruby threatened to annihilate the entire kingdom unless he presented himself, unleashing a devastating beam of power across the land. The cataclysmic blast obliterated distant mountain ranges, leaving the onlookers in complete shock at the terrifying scale of her magic. Reveling in her overwhelming strength, Ruby cackled maniacally about getting revenge on everyone who had ever mistreated her, starting directly with Lloyd, who cursed his terrible plight. Gathering his nerve, he ran toward her, demanding to know why she was causing such havoc. Looking down at him from her towering height, she admitted she thoroughly enjoyed having complete leverage over him. Her ultimate objective was laid bare. She sought to crush his resistance completely until he surrendered unconditionally, leaving his companions bewildered by the sheer extreme of her desires. She recoiled slightly as Iris stepped forward, demanding to know why anyone could harbor dissatisfaction with the heroic mage who had saved the kingdom. In response, the monstrous entities surrounding her snarled back, insisting that Lloyd was far too dense to grasp anything said to him anyway. Furious, she launched into a passionate tirade, reminding the group that having grown up together in the same orphanage, she knew better than anyone that Lloyd was a hopeless fool who would not have survived without her. As her harsh words hung in the air, Isolde stepped forward to address the monstrous manifestation, acknowledging that her own early perception of Lloyd had been far from flattering. She openly confessed that upon their first meeting, she had viewed Lloyd with deep suspicion, considering him unpredictable and potentially dangerous. But then her tone softened, explaining how completely her opinion of him had transformed over time. Gesturing toward the young mage, Isolde declared how much Lloyd had learned and grown during their shared journey, ultimately forging himself into a truly great adventurer. The rest of the companions enthusiastically agreed, recounting how Lloyd had overcome immense odds to defeat powerful adversaries and halt the invasion of Malzeria. Sophilia offered her own bright smile and added that, above all else, the food he prepared for them was genuinely delicious, bringing tears of overwhelming gratitude to Lloyd's eyes. Watching the monstrous entity shrink back in stunned silence at the overwhelming display of loyalty, Iris couldn't help but smile at how stupidly wholesome the situation had become. She watched in quiet solemnity as the massive creature roared in furious denial, refusing to believe that anyone could truly change or care for him. As the monster shrieked desperate insults to tear him down, the warm, undeniable praises of his companions echoed louder, cutting through the venomous words. Hearing the bitter claim that their friendship was nothing more than a childish game of pretend, he stood frozen, his eyes wide in absolute astonishment. The creature continued to mock him, claiming his friends were mere nobodies who had built up a lie, unaware that something deep within him had fundamentally snapped. In an explosion of absolute fury, he lunged forward, the force of his sudden movement shattering the ground beneath him like a thunderclap. The devastating impact tore through the area, blasting dust and fiery energy high into the air in a display of unbridled rage. Emerging from the swirling smoke, he reflected on a lifetime of enduring cruelty and blaming himself for the hatred cast his way. Raising his voice in a resonant shout, he proclaimed that while he could tolerate attacks against himself, insulting the precious bonds he formed with others was entirely unforgivable. Hearing his roaring declaration, his companions gasped in utter shock, caught completely off guard by his sudden display of intense anger. She stared at him with wide, trembling eyes, realizing for the very first time just how truly furious he was. She could only watch in dread as the monstrous creature bared its endless rows of razor-sharp fangs, its eyes wide with unrestrained fury. Surging forward, the beast screamed a defiant declaration that it would show no mercy, even to Lloyd himself. Listening to those desperate shouts, he froze in sheer disbelief as words of encouragement echoed around him. urging him to stand firm and give his all.